Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday. We are one day closer to Notre Dame kicking off. We're one day closer to Notre Dame getting into summer workouts and fall camp. A lot to cover in between then, Brian. And today we have another episode about kind of the state of the program. Now that we can finally turn the page on spring, we can start diving into these position groups at Notre Dame. And up next on the docket today is defensive end room. And so we're breaking this really into three different parts. We're talking about, obviously, a lot of conversation around Bubakar Traore. We're going to be talking about the depth overall in the room. We're going to be breaking down the future of the defensive end room. Then we're wrapping everything up today with a mailbag that's going to be focused on defensive ends. Like Brian said, anything defensive end related. So about Notre Dame, past, present, or future, top defensive ends in the across the country, or just simply in recruiting. So going to be a really fun show today, man.
It is. I'm looking forward to it. And this is a very important position for Notre Dame, Trevor. Obviously, you want to win a championship, have a great defensive line. I think that's absolutely a key ingredient. And we've seen that, and certainly in recent years, Indiana had an outstanding defensive line. Ohio State had an outstanding defensive line. I don't know that I would say all season, but certainly in the postseason, it played up to its potential. And we've seen, I think, that entire starting lineup and several backups get drafted in the last 2 years. Michigan obviously had a great and very deep defensive line. And then, of course, Georgia was very much the definition of a line-driven defense in 21 and 22. So, I think it's certainly a very key ingredient. And look, have there been teams that haven't won without a great defensive line? Sure. I don't think LSU in 2019 or Alabama in 2020 had great defensive lines, but sure, okay, you can win a championship this year if you're Notre Dame without a great defensive line, as long as you score between 48 to 49.5 points per game and, have the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback and maybe the runner-up at, somewhere in there and, a couple number one overall draft picks. And, sure. You could win that way, but the reality is there's been a lot more teams that haven't won that way than teams that have won that way. And I think for Notre Dame, it's a lot easier when you do have it that way. And it's been a position that's been a good one for Notre Dame for the most part the last couple seasons. Can it take another step? I think that's going to be a big question, Trev, but it's a very, very important position for Notre Dame. Very important position.
Without a doubt, it's one of those that we kind of file under the categories of you need it to win a championship. Unlike some other positions, now they're all important. Football is the greatest team sport out there, in my opinion. I'm sure you're under the same belief, but there are some positions that are higher, I guess you could say, up on the totem pole when you talk about winning a championship than some others. Quarterback, defensive end, corner, they're a little bit higher up there than will linebacker, or they're a little bit higher up there than slot receiver. You need all of it. But defensive end is an absolute premier position. One of the things going into the spring is there is a level of uncertainty about this group. We figured we knew what we would see to some degree from Bubakar and Bryce Young's going into year 3. They get Keon Keeley out of the portal. Kind of a full circle moment for that young man coming back to Notre Dame after being committed in the 2023 class. Obviously very excited about the true freshmen that come in, but overall they were a relative question mark outside of a few pieces up at the top. So where we start this conversation, Brian, is do you feel better about the defensive end room coming out of spring?
Yeah, I went into the spring hoping that it would be better than what we've seen. And I came out of the spring with kind of two feelings of, yes, it's better than we thought it was going to be, but there's still some legitimate questions about how good can it be and does it have the depth needed to sustain some of the injuries we've seen in past seasons. So, when you look at this defensive line and you start talking about going into the spring, we thought Bubakar was a guy capable of taking another jump. We still need to see it in the fall, but I saw growth from him this spring. I saw physical growth from him. I certainly saw his game grow this spring. We saw Bryce Young continue to take steps towards becoming a better player. We'll talk more about that in a couple different places. You knew the freshmen were good. We knew the freshmen were good, but how good would they be? Obviously we know Charlie Partridge has a great track record, but how quickly would he be able to click with the new players? We know that Keon Keeley flashed, but could he take those next steps? There's all these different question marks, Trev. And I think some of those still remain to some degree. But if I look at okay, here's where they started the offseason, right here. And then here's where they're going to end the offseason, right here, or end the season to be that elite group. Like, where are they? Well, right now I kind of feel like they made a jump to here. And now it's about taking those strides over the summer and then the fall to kind of get to here. And so those are all aspects of it, Trevor. You say, okay, I feel that this group took strides in the spring. Could they have been bigger strides? Yeah, sure. But I often wonder, if they did take those strides, would we be having a different conversation about the Notre Dame offensive line right now? That's the problem when you're talking about spring ball is, man, the receivers dominated all spring. What, can your corners not cover anybody? Like, what's going on? Like, man, CJ Carr was under duress the entire spring. The defensive ends were great. Do your tackles suck? Like, what's going on right now? And, we saw great battles. And I'll say this, Trev, I do think that's part of the reason that we're seeing growth from the edge players and the tackles on offense is because of them going against each other. How do I know that that Will Black's going to be ready to handle the edge pressure from Miami? Because he's had to block Bubakar Traore and Bryce Young and Rodney Dunham and Keon Keeley and guys like that all spring and into fall camp. So it's great preparation. And, the best teams I was on, Trev, whether it was our national championship team or other teams that made the college, our version of the college football playoffs at the D3 level, usually most weeks our best opponent was the one we faced in practice. And, Notre Dame's kind of getting to that point now. And I think that's why you're seeing growth from both of those groups. But yes, I believe that the line made some strides. I think where we can debate is how big were the strides and how much can be done. Was it enough that you needed to see this spring? For me, it was what I wanted to see this spring. It wasn't like, okay, no doubt about it, hands down, the DNs are going to be elite. I came out of spring saying, you know what? They made really positive steps. I think I'm even more confident in this unit that this group can be outstanding, but there's still work to be done.
Agreed. It's always a double-edged sword when you talk about coming out of spring, because on one hand, you want to have as many questions answered as possible, just because, kind of like what we talked about yesterday with recruiting. You just want to know. You want to have the answers. You want to, I believe Karen said that Notre Dame kicks off in 124 days. We want to have all the answers, and we want to know what this team is going to look like 124 days before kickoff. The other side to that conversation is, is this the best that they're going to be 124 days away from kicking off from game one? So there's definitely some things that we still need to see, which I think is a good place to be. I'm with you. I feel better about the defensive end room, got some more questions answered. Some things are just more verified than things that we learned, but nonetheless, Brian, there were some questions that were answered because you have to find the happy medium. You don't want to leave spring. It's like, yeah, I have the same questions that I did on March 10th that I do now on May 5th. You want some things to be answered, but up for debate on if you want them all to be answered. And one of them that we did get answered, Brian, is a big one. Like you said, for national championship teams, there are patterns that you can go back and look at. And I'm going to have an article coming out about this later, about how you can go back and look at every national championship winning team for the majority, especially since Georgia in 2021, they had premier edge play. And in particular, they kind of had some people up at the top. IU had Mikhail Kamara. Obviously, Ohio State had both JT and Jack Sawyer. You had Michigan and what they were able to do in 2023. One of the questions that we had answered was Bubakar is better and he's ready for a big, big year this season.
There's no question, Trev, and we definitely saw the strides there, and it's important. Like, why does it matter? Does Notre Dame really need it? Well, look, they had this guy this year, yeah, but they have won a national championship. I just, it's like it. When I look at the defensive line, I look at the defensive ends, and it's not that it's like if he's not a first team All-American, you can't win a championship. No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying, however, is that he's got to be really good. And the better he is, the easier it is to have a championship caliber defensive line. And that's the key. Because that's all that the defensive line can control, right? Is we're going to play as good as we can play. And then it's up to everybody else to kind of do their job. We're going to do our job at an elite level. And what we saw from Bubakar this spring, Trev, was obviously a guy that continues to, fill out and get stronger. I've, kind of compared some photos of him that my wife took during practices and during the Blue Gold game compared to last year. And he's clearly, continuing to get a little thicker, but not like where it's like, okay, I think he's he's past that point of, diminishing returns type of thing. We saw a guy that is clearly taking to the coaching that he's being given. He's trying to develop his repertoire of moves. And the question now is, I think kind of with him is twofold. I think he definitely answered a question in that, does he want to be that guy? Does he have the tools to be that guy? Can he take those steps? Yeah, I think he took big strides towards that because he was pretty good last year for Notre Dame. He was Notre Dame's best. I would argue, I don't know if you want to kind of push back on this, Trev, but I would argue he was their best defensive lineman last year. When you just take front to back, I'm not saying he was their best guy every single week. He didn't even play against Navy. But when you look at a guy that led the team in tackles for loss with 10 and led the team with 6.5 sacks, I don't think there's any doubt he was their best defensive lineman, Trev. Would you want to push back on that?
No, not at all.
Okay, so we agree there, but the question is, okay, but was he the player he's capable of being? Not even is he good enough to do this or that. It's like, did he play to his full potential? And my answer for last season is no, he didn't. And at least not all season. And I think what we saw from Bubakar last year, Trev, is a guy that showed the flashes of the big time player we know he can be. We've talked about the 31 pressures last season, which wasn't a great number, but the 16 hits plus sacks on the quarterback from Pro Football Focus is a very good number. So he certainly showed some potential, but he's a guy that I thought took a while to get going. And it really wasn't until like the Boise game and NC State and USC that we really started to see Bubakar hit his peak. And then I think he kind of faded a little bit the last couple games. He was able to kind of just out-talent Syracuse, and he just looked gassed against Stanford. Well, why is that? Why did he get off to a late start, and why did he fade late? Because he's a guy that missed 11 of 16 games the year before, and I think took a while to kind of shake the rust off, just like Jason Onye did. And then you kind of hit that wall where he had played way more snaps than he'd ever played before, and I think that impacted his ability to play the volume. And I think that's something we can talk a little bit about, this year is maybe they should be more mindful of the reps he takes this season early on, but more so it's about shaking off some of that rust because he wasn't out there during the spring either and didn't get like maximum reps and work during the spring either. He was the guy that was kind of coming back from that injury. So now you've got that year of recovering from the knee injury under your belt. Can you take that next step? And we certainly started to do that. And can you take the coaching that you're getting from Charlie Partridge and say, I've got to develop my all-around game? And I thought he made big strides last spring as a run defender, and I think he continued that this spring. But I also love the fact that what I saw from Bubakar is a guy that's clearly working on trying to expand his moves. And we saw Gerby Lambert have a great spring at right tackle, but the move that Bubakar put on him in the Jersey scrimmage was ridiculous. And you're like, okay, all right, he's taking those strides, Trev. So that was the big thing for me with Bubakar is, could he become that elite player? I think big picture, the answer is like still, it remains to be seen if he's answered that question. Did he take strides, like big strides between when the season ended to now to becoming that kind of player? I would argue, yeah, I do think he is. He has. Now it's about taking those next steps. But I feel very confident that Bubakar Traore is going to go into the 26th season as long as he stays healthy and say, okay, he has the tools. He's taking the strides. I believe he's poised to become the player. It's no longer about projection. It's now the expectation. And he performed like a guy that we should expect that from in the fall.
Agreed. We've seen flashes of what Traore's been able to do, but it's been a lot of based on God-given ability, not necessarily refining who he is and adding tools to his toolkit as a pass rusher. Here's some numbers for you to back up what you're talking about, Brian. So a lot of people like to just compare raw numbers. It's, this player is better because they had more pressures, and that just doesn't tell the entire story. Mikael Kamara had 59 total pressures last year. But when you go and you talk about his hit rate, he had 10 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. but it took him 59 pressures to do it.
Mhm.
Bubakar's a different story. So for Kamara, he had a 3.4% hit rate of his snaps, total pass rushing snaps. For Traore, it was a hit rate of 5.4. To drive it home even more, you look at what Jack Sawyer did in 2024, and it was an insane year. 64 total pressures, 26 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Well, last season, Traore recorded a hit and sack rate of the quarterback of 51% of his pressures. For Jack Sawyer in 2024, it was 40%. So we've seen the level of efficiency with him, and that's just straight up being about his God-given ability. Now Charlie Partridge is starting to put in the work to refine him as a pass rusher, and he's taken to the coaching, to your point. I'm with you. I really think he's putting in the work to do so because it's really, really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the numbers, Trevor, we've talked about how Bubakar has shown the flashes of being, the kind of guy that can become a truly dominant edge player, and we've seen those flashes. And so then the question comes down to, all right, is he capable of kind of being that on a consistent basis? Like, that's really the question for me. It's like when you look at last year, for example, and you look at his hit plus sack numbers, like, they're actually really good. Didn't have the consistent success rate he had the year before, but certainly they were very good. And then you kind of look at the total pressures rate and you're like, okay, that wasn't as good as maybe what it was the previous year. And you say, okay, well, what's the in between, right? What's the in between of where he is and where he can be? And then you look at, like, what are some of the better pass rushers in the country, like you talk about. You look at Pro Football Focus, and we've mentioned that that one thing we do like about Pro Football Focus is that they do good with, like, data collection. I do believe that that's true. I think they do well with data collection. Well, when you look at Bubakar, last year, he had it's what they call, I'm going to just read it to you. It's called PRP. It's a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times they rush the passer. Well, Bryce Young was actually their top guy last year with an 8.3% rate, and Bubakar is at 7.6. Well, TJ Parker was at 7.6. Cam Franklin, the stud from Ole Miss, was at 7.6. There's some guys down there, but when you look at, like, top pass rushers, David Bailey was at 13.0. Clev Lubin was at 12.8. Princewell Umanmalin was at 11.9. Derek Moore from Michigan, 11.6. The Pierre kid from Alabama is 11.5. You look at some – Romello Height is at 10.8. Malachi Lawrence, who was the first-round draft pick, 10.7. Damon Wilson from Missouri, 10.4. Colin Simmons, 10.3. And, Cassius Howell, 9.8. I think those are the things that you look at and say, okay, he needs to get up into that category. He's capable of being in that category. And you look at Mikael Kamara was at 9.2. Now, the thing that you pointed out rightly was that's just pressures, like total pressures, all encompassing. And that's the thing for Bubakar is when he wins, he gets to the quarterback. And so now it's about, can you be more consistently disruptive? And I think that's going to be the thing that we're going to have to find out about Bubakar is, can he be more consistently disruptive as a pass rusher than maybe where he was last season, where the hits number is pretty good. It's now, can you get to that next level of you're consistently doing that and you're consistently being disruptive, as opposed to, a guy that is flashy. Does that make sense? I kind of went all over the place a little bit on that one, but that's the thing for Bubakar is I think he's capable of being that guy. We just have to see if, he can do it regularly. And I'm trying to find what his PRP rate was in 2024. I know it was higher than what it was last year, but it's getting back to kind of consistently being that kind of guy it's going to be the key for him.
Cool part about spring football, Brian, is Bubakar wasn't the only player that took some big strides and really impressed us this spring. Just got done talking about one of the oldest guys in the room. Now we're going to talk about one of the youngest guys in the room and switch gears to talk a little bit about Rodney Dunham, who he's a player, Brian, where he really started to flash, and he's a dude. Coming into this year, we talked about how highly touted the 2026 recruiting class was, and Rodney Dunham carried a big weight in that. He was one of the players that we consistently talked about of he could crack the rotation as a true freshman. After what we saw in the spring, I think that conversation carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, this is a big one, Trevor, because we're not going in order of like, okay, he's their second best DN. We're talking about, what questions did we get answered in the 2026 spring? That's really where we're coming from on this. And when you look at Rodney Dunham, one of the questions coming into the spring was, the chances are pretty decent that Notre Dame is going to have to play at least one freshman. May not like it, but that's probably going to be the case. They're going to probably have to play at least one freshman. Then the question comes down to, okay, they're going to have to play one freshman. Who is that? Is it because he's going to have to play, which I think he does, or is it just because hey, he's earned that opportunity? Well, the reality is going into spring, it was more about he's going to kind of have to play. They're going to need that guy ready to play. Coming out of the spring, it's more of, okay, Rodney Dunham is going to play because Rodney Dunham's ready to play. That's the big thing. When you talk about Rodney Dunham, it's yeah, he's going to play this spring. I think we kind of always knew he was going to have to play. I think there was more questions about whether or not Ebenezer Utade was going to redshirt or not. I don't think there was ever a conversation about whether or not Rodney Dunham was going to redshirt. The question is, what would the role be? Would it be a light role because you kind of need him to take some snaps off Bubakar? Or is it that dude he's a dude and he needs to be able to play? And I think what we saw, honestly, from the beginning of spring to the end of spring is that he's ready to play. Now, he's ready to play for a freshman. He's not going to look like a fifth-year senior, on day one in Notre Dame. He's going to look like a really talented freshman, which means a guy that can make all the plays you need him to make, but he's also going to have freshman mistakes, and he's got to get stronger and all that other kind of stuff. So I think when I look at Rodney, I think his emergence is one of the biggest storylines, if not the biggest storyline of the spring, because I think that there was more certainty for me. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Trav. There was more certainty for me that Bubakar was going to make the jump. There was more certainty to me with some of the veterans because there's a level of a baseline that we've seen with them. It was a question for me with Rodney because Rodney's always been a super toolsy guy. But as a senior, he was still kind of bouncing back from a knee injury he had late in his junior season. So I felt like we didn't necessarily get to see peak Rodney Dunham as a senior. Still very good. Still a guy that I ranked as a top 50 prospect and that On3 Rivals still thought was a top 10 national prospect. So the tools are always there. But how quickly would he adjust and adapt? And, man, we saw it. And it's not just the length and the speed and the athleticism and all that. He played with a great motor this spring. He played with instinctiveness this spring. We saw in the very first practice where he reads the quarterback's eyes, peels off, and jumps up and breaks up a pass. Okay, yeah, this cat's a little bit different. And I would argue both of them were a little bit that way, him and Ebenezer, but especially Rodney's a little bit more physically advanced. We saw him being pretty stout at the point of attack. Now, he's going to have to keep getting stronger. But, man, I tell you what, Trev, Rodney Dunham didn't just show that he's ready to play. Rodney Dunham showed that he's ready if he can continue building on what we've seen. He's a guy that's got the capability of being an impact player as a freshman, not just a good, rotation player kind of. He's not just he's going to give you the replacement for Junior Telemaka, which is not an elite talent, but, man, just a blue-collar kid that's going to give you everything, every snap. You know what you're going to get from him, and he's dependable. I hope that Rodney can be those things, but Rodney's got another gear to him that we didn't see from the depth players at the defensive line the last 4 or 5 years, except for one guy. What's the one exception? It was Bubakar in 2024 before his knee injury. When he was coming off the bench, it was just a force. That's what I saw. Rodney, again, I want to make sure we don't put too much on him too early, but that's what he showed us this spring. Now, build on that and take it to that, continue to take it to that next level. But Rodney Dunham showing himself ready to actually be an impact player was a huge part of the spring.
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree more. With a freshman defensive end with that many tools and that much talent coming in, I think he could have been a contributor right away if it was just a third down situation. You put him on the field, Charlie Partridge pulls him over on the sideline and says, "Hey, just go get the quarterback." You know what I mean? Like, hey, just use your best. Same thing like how we talk about with Cam Williams a couple seasons ago. It's like, you're telling me you can't just put him out on the field and ask him to run a go route because that corner clearly just can't keep up with him. Physical tools wise, there's going to be a lot of offensive tackles that Rodney Dunham would have faced this year that just couldn't block him from a talent standpoint. But what surprised me was his level of football IQ. Love what Charlie Partridge said about his motor as well. There was a post-practice press conference where Charlie Partridge was like, that kid leaves everything out on the field every single practice. There is not a practice where he walks off the field and he is not just absolutely gassed. And that's something that you want to see. I'm with you. As far as the level of certainty question that you posed, I was there with Bubakar, maybe not to the degree that you were. I was confident that we were going to see it just from like what that track record was. I know we'll talk about the depth later. I still had some questions around like Bryce. What are we going to see from Logan Thomas? Areas like that. So in that sense, I wasn't as solidified as what we were going to see from the depth, but from Bubakar, I was pretty confident from what we were going to see. But when you have the emergence from Rodney Dunham, that's the spot that you want to be in because the depth is still continuing to develop. But Rodney Dunham is quickly surging to where it's like, to your point about being an impact player, this is no longer a conversation of, yeah, he'll play against Purdue. Yeah, he'll play against Rice. Yeah, he'll play against Syracuse at the end of the year. I'm to the point now, it wouldn't shock me if they trusted him to be out on the field on the road in Provo on October 17th.
I'll actually be shocked if she isn't, if he isn't in those moments. Like, I'll be shocked if he's not at least the number 4 and on the roster soon going into the season. And look, it really continues beyond that, Trevor, because the one big question mark we had was the depth of the position. Was, okay, that Bryce and Bubakar are at least going to give you a certain level. I mean, they were kind of the starters last year. You've seen what Keon Keeley can do to a certain degree. Inconsistent, but flashing, impactful. I mean, he ended the South Carolina game with a sack. He had a sack in the SEC title game. He had a sack in the playoff win over Oklahoma. And we know what Logan Thomas can do to a degree when he's healthy. So I felt like, okay, I feel good about the starting lineup. The depth has some potential, but it's more of a question mark, not just with those 2 veterans, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but behind those 4, you were in a situation where there's 2 redshirt freshmen who've never played a meaningful down and 2 true freshmen. You're talking about playing a 15, 16 game season, and you're going to go through it with 4 defensive ends, one of which struggles to weigh 220 pounds, and another guy who's flashy but not at all consistent. I don't know that I felt great about the depth beyond that. We liked the talent, but they hadn't shown a whole lot, and it's young, and you don't want to have to play young guys because you have to. We talked a lot about Rodney Dunham, but I thought Ebenezer Utade was the bigger surprise for me this spring. I'm not shocked that Rodney looked the way he looked. I was hoping we would see it, but we just needed to see it. I don't think either of us are surprised that Rodney's where he is. I am surprised that Ebenezer is where he is, not because he doesn't have big-time talent, because as you all know, people that have been on the show for a while, he was a 5-star upside guy for me. He was a difference maker. We were super fired up about that commitment, but he was barely 205, 210 pounds when he committed to Notre Dame. There were legitimate questions about, does he have the ability to help as a freshman? And then we saw, I've seen Ebenezer up close and personal. I was there when he, at the practice last year when he went and gave Notre Dame his commitment. You see this tall, gangly, long-armed kid that you're like, this guy's going to need to become really good friends with Lauren Lando, and he's also need to get, really good friends with Alexa Appleman, who's like part of the nutrition program and all that. Like, he's going to need some work. Well, apparently he did, because the first day of spring, we're like, okay, he's legit 235, 240 right now. And you look at it and say, hey, this kid's physically ready to play. Now, his game is not as advanced as Rodney's, but we saw some flashes from Ebenezer to where we're now at the point now where Trevor was, there's no way this kid's getting redshirted unless there's an injury. Like, there's no way. So I think both freshmen to some degree. Now, could Ebenezer's role look a lot like what Logan Thomas's role in 2024? I think that's more likely. the occasional edge rusher. Maybe he doesn't play a whole lot against Miami and BYU, but he definitely gets some legitimate snaps against Purdue and Stanford and teams like that. Sure. But at least you feel like he can give you that. But then there's two other players that showed me some flashes this spring too, especially one player that stepped up. I thought he was a lot better in the jersey scrimmage and the blue gold game. But the redshirt freshmen, Joe Reif and Dom Hulak, showed us something. I mean, watching Dom Hulak in practice, like physically, it was like, is that Josh Burnham? Like, did Josh come back? He changed number 40. He kind of looks a lot like Josh. Not quite as long as Josh was, but you're like, okay. And he plays with a relentless motor. Like, I felt like watching Dom, like, if you had to put him in the field, could he give you some of the stuff that Junior Tuilamaka gave you? Maybe. Maybe he might still be a year away, but he's getting close. The guy that really impressed me at the end of the spring, though, was Joe Reif. Like, he's really filled out well physically, plays with a good motor. He's using his hands a lot better. He's got enough athleticism where he can be a problem on the edge as a run defender and an occasional pass rusher. So I would argue that Rodney Dunham's emergence and Joe Reif's emergence, plus the potential that Ebenezer can give you to at least be a Logan Thomas from 2024 player, which again, when you look at Logan Thomas, I mean, Logan was a very disruptive player for Notre Dame in limited opportunities the year before. They used him a lot as an edge rusher. He had 5 pressures on only 28 pass rush snaps. That's really good. He had a over 13% pass rush rate. And, which I think is about what David Bailey had last year leading the nation. I'm going to pull that number up real quick, Trev. But, the point is that you saw him in some big moments, right? Logan was on the field on the 4th down at the end of the Georgia game trying to rush the quarterback when Donovan Hinish had the sack. Ebenezer can give you that. But now I'm ready to throw Joe Reif into the mix as someone who might be able to help you in a lot of games as can he give you 10, 12 snaps off the bench? Can he give you, some Junior Tuilamaka reps? Can he give you, who he reminded me a lot of? Would it shock you if maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year? Would it shock you if Joe Reif at some point in time has a Nana Osafo-Mensah 2023 type of season as a rotation defensive end? Didn't he give off those kind of vibes? Like, he looked a lot. I mean, he doesn't look like Nana, but like his game looks like Nana. You know what I mean? Like, he plays like Nana did 2 years ago for Notre Dame, or it'd be 3 now if we're talking 26 season. But Nana was a very underrated part of that 2023 defensive line coming off the bench. And I saw a lot of what Nana did is just kind of a straight power rusher that's got to, he's got to improve his repertoire, but a good run defender, plays with a great motor. I saw some of that from Joe Reif. Now, is he ready to be that guy this year? I think he still has to prove that in the fall, but I'm a whole lot more confident that one of those two guys is going to be able to give you that type of role this season than I was going into spring. And so I think that part also makes me feel a lot better about the depth right now than I did going into the spring. And I think that's a very important, because I think you could argue that it was the biggest question on the D line was the depth in the defensive end position. Like, D tackle was like, okay, which one of these really good players is going to be in the rotation? It was like, of these 9, who are the 5 they're going to earn, 5 or 6 are going to earn a rotation spot? Where at defensive end, it was kind of like, is anybody going to step in and force their way into the rotation? Because there was a lot more uncertainty. I feel a whole lot better about that now than I did going into the spring.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. One of the common things, and this is just my personal thoughts here. Like, I don't want to speak for anybody else, like whether it's like obviously Brian or Sean Stiers or Vince or anybody that also covers the team. But when I looked at those 4 guys that you brought up, they are farther ahead than where I thought they were going to be at this point in the offseason. All 4, including Rodney Dunham. I thought Rodney Dunham was the breakout that he had over spring. I thought he was going to have in fall camp. I thought what Ebenezer looked like this spring, I honestly kind of thought he was going to look like that next spring. And I don't want to paint them as like an afterthought, but I thought Joe Reif and Dom Hulak were about a year away from talking about them being a significant contribution to the edge rotation. Now we're in a discussion where it's like, okay, and we've seen Notre Dame players get hurt before. A big question was, hey, is this defensive line, especially the ends, in a spot where they can withstand some of the injuries that they had in 2024? We didn't know the answer to that. Now, I'm not saying that if Bubakar goes down, knock on wood, that They're just going to be able to replace him with Ebenezer Utade or Rodney Dunham. But I feel a lot better about that scenario now than I did, say, back in February, because it was a relative question mark. As things stand today, Notre Dame is still FanDuel's favorite to win. They have the best odds, I should say, to make the college football playoffs this season. And I'm not saying that now I feel solidified in that happening because Joe Reif and Dom Hulak and Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utade broke out. But I like their chances a lot more now. Definitely doesn't hurt. And that's some of the things. Those are my takeaways with those 4 young guys that you mentioned. I'm with you. They answered a lot of questions for us. They really did.
Now, I'm not trying to say, and neither is Trevor, that Joe Reif is going to go out this year and be as good as Bryce Young. I'm not saying that. What we're saying is, like, I think that they put themselves in position to be good depth players, where the drop off between your starters and the backups is not as great as I thought it was going to be going into the spring. And just so we're clear, and so, but I mean, I went back and watched the Blue Gold game again and focused more on the line a couple of days ago, and I was like, man, yeah, I'm really liking what I'm seeing from Joe Reif. I like some of the hustle plays we saw from Dom Hulak. I just think this group's in a much better position than it was. And so when you talk about the, post-spring analysis, this is a group that I think is trending in a good direction. And then the final piece is this, Trevor, is why. Well, number one, there's a lot of good talent. Number two, I think we certainly saw the Charlie Partridge effect this spring. Like we had high expectations for Coach Partridge based on what he's done at Wisconsin and Pitt and places like that. But it's fine that he did it there, but can he do it at Notre Dame? That was a question. And, obviously I saw a little bit more practices than you did, but you saw the 2 full ones. We were both there. Number one, just watching him work. And then number 2, seeing the product that the defensive ends are putting on the field. I think we've already started to see the Charlie Partridge effect I shouldn't say the Charlie Partridge influence take effect.
Agreed. The defensive ends are doing things this offseason to help elevate individual aspects of their game, which I appreciate. And before people get carried away, if you're listening via podcast or listening on the live stream, this isn't a shot at Al Washington. This isn't, thank goodness Charlie Partridge is here because Al Washington refused to teach him these things. Not the case. Charlie Partridge, however, is coming in and adding tools to their tool belt as far as counter moves for pass rush ability, adding specific tools to their tool belt. And the thing that I appreciate is it's player specific, because you also can't coach Joe Reif the same way that you coach Bryce Young. You can't coach Ebenezer Utade the same way that you're going to coach Keon Keeley, because they're different players. But the things that I saw at practice is Partridge is very, very, very intentional by the way he goes about his business. He's very hands-on. I mean that literally and figuratively. He coaches Bubakar Traore the same way that he's coaching Dom Hulak and Joe Reif. Part of the reason why I think we saw those 2 guys really start to come on this spring. And so those are some of the things that I appreciated about watching him, man. I'm with you completely. He's really taken over command of that room, and the players are really taking him as a coach.
Trev, when we kind of look at this breakdown, we'll kind of, we break it into different parts, and part 1 obviously is kind of looking at the spring, and part 2 of this conversation here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, is, okay, so what now? Right? Like, okay, they did this in the spring. What now? And we're not going to talk about, well, they're going to work on their footwork and they're going to do. We're saying, like, what are the things, what's the specific growth that we need to see moving forward? And what are the things that say, okay, I like where the DNs are at. I definitely need to see more. Like, they haven't like arrived. Like, oh my gosh, like going into 2018, we were talking about like, and I think Lou and Samoji and I were doing shows back then. But I remember just being very excited all spring about the breakouts from Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin. Like, they were major question marks going into the spring, but coming out of spring, like, they're dogs. And there was no doubt that just keep doing what you're doing right now in the fall. That's where they were at. I think with this unit, they're not there yet. They're coming along, but there are some things that I need to see from this group as a whole, and then more specifically from some individual players to say, okay, keep building on the things you're learning from Coach Partridge, because you're only 15 practices into 40 actual practices, plus more football school, things like that over the summer. But, okay, take this next step as a group, but then more specifically, certain players. And I think the first player to me that is still sort of in a, you've got to take your game to another level. You've got to take that next step. And that is ultimately a huge key to this team stepping up. And I think the first place we go to there is Bryce Young. I saw a guy that made strides, but he's not there yet. He's not where I think he should be and can be as a junior. Later in the spring, we started to see more of that. Now it's about, can he build on it? And really for Bryce, what it comes down to, Trevor, is you win with your God-given ability. I mean, he's just big, strong, and athletic. And if you look at last year, for example, he was, as we pointed out, he was their leader in pass rush snaps last season, or I mean in success rate when it comes to pass rush snaps. Like, he had 29 total pressures last season compared to 31 for Bubakar. Well, the thing is, Trev, he had, I think it was like about 100 fewer pass rush snaps last year than Bubakar. So Bubakar had 294 and Bryce was at 202. So 92 fewer snaps, only had 2 fewer pressures and only 5 fewer hits plus sacks than the quarterback. You know, I mean, he was their most effective. He's their most effective returning edge rusher when it comes to just like success rate from last season. And now it's about him taking that jump and saying, okay, need you to do that more consistently and need you to take and just improve your overall technical game. That's really the thing. Is Bryce doesn't always look like he has a plan when he's going after the quarterback. And then the other thing that's been the biggest surprise is Bryce wasn't great against the run last year. And that's the one thing I thought he would be. We're seeing improvement, but that's another place where it's just continue taking those strides. Bryce Young is better at the end of spring than he was at the end of the 2025 season. But there's another jump that I need to see him make this summer and in the fall camp, because they need him to be that best version of himself far more consistently in 2026.
Yeah, man. I mean, Bryce unlocks kind of the ceiling of this duo between Bubakar and Bryce. On paper, it's great to sit down and say it's like Notre Dame returns both of their ends and this secondary and all their linebackers. Well, the other side of that conversation next to Bubakar Traore is Bryce Young. The next two guys that we're getting ready to talk about, I think, unlock the overall ceiling of this room for a multitude of different reasons. We spent part one talking about how awesome it was watching Rodney Dunham blossom into this player that's ready to contribute and potentially be an impact guy, but you don't want to have to rely on that. Well, how do you get yourself in a position where you don't have to rely on a true freshman to come in and be the counterpart to Bubakar? It's guys like Bryce Young taking that next step. Sometimes when you look at stats, it kind of fogs some things. With Bryce, I think the picture is like crystal clear. You know, it's the next step in his evolution is being able to finish. On a per snap basis, his pressure rate was the best on the team, but you got to be able to finish. You can't end with having the best pressure rate on the team with 29 in 90, what'd you say, 92 less pass rushing snaps than what Bubakar did, and then end the season with like 1 sack. That's the next step in his evolution, is being able to finish. Your God-given ability is getting you up to the point where, okay, most tackles in college football can't stop you just on raw talent.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have to be able to finish the plays that you're making. That's the next step.
And that's where the repertoire comes from. That's where the using your hands better, using your technique better. Here's a crazy stat to kind of back up what you're talking about, Trevor. When you look at hits on the quarterback last year, so this is a stat that Pro Football Focus keeps. So the number of times that you don't sack but get a hit on the quarterback. Bryce Young led the team with 8. Well, that's good, kind of. Bubakar was second in hits on the quarterback, but he was number 1 in sacks by a lot. The problem for Bryce is he was tied with Josh Burnham and Jalen Sneed for 4th. Drake Bowen was second on the team. This is according to PFF. Now, when they count sacks, so they have Bubakar down for 10. The way that they count sacks is a half a sack is a sack. So, like, if you have 5 sacks and then 3 half a sacks to get you to 6.5, that's 8 in Pro Football Focus. So, I mean, technically, you could have 4 sacks and they were all halves, and you'd have 8 according to Pro Football Focus. So they keep it a little bit differently. So just keep that in mind. But like they had Bubakar with 10, and then next was Drake Bowen with 6 on 90 pass rushes. Next after that was Kingston on 114 pass rushes. And then Bryce was tied with Josh Burnham, who had 90 or 89 fewer snaps than Bubakar. And he was tied with Jalen Sneed, who had 160 fewer pressures than Bubakar. Heck, Madden Faremo, actually, this is sacks. Madden Faremo only had 1 fewer sack than Bryce Young did, according to PFF, and he only had 12 pass rushes last year. So, like you said, Trev, it's about finishing. Like, not just pressuring a guy and getting hit, but finish it. You're too good not to be a better finisher. And then the other piece for Bryce is he should be a very stout run defender, and at times he is. But it's really about growing your game. I mean, there was a play last year against Texas A&M where he just jumped in the wrong gap. Quarterback gets outside of him and just takes off running. There's nobody out there. That's not a talent issue. That's just a young guy making a mistake issue. Well, now you're a junior, and it's time to step up and be a factor. So somebody in the chat asked, did Bryce play against Miami and Texas A&M? Yeah, Bryce started those games. Bryce played a ton. He played 32 snaps against Miami and 31 against Texas A&M. And actually, in a lot of ways, had some good moments against Texas A&M. He had 4 pressures, but it was the mistakes, the not keeping his proper rush lane, jumping in the wrong gap in the run game that created some big plays. And that's what Notre Dame talks about. It's like you've got to win, but you've got to win within the framework of the defense. Because if you don't, then all of a sudden you've exposed a gap, and a good quarterback or a good running back is going to find it. So for Bryce, it's just about, take this group of plays over here that are you just being dominant and start to do that more consistently, and have a plan when the ball snapped, right? Have a hey, I'm going to win this way. And be more stout, be more consistent. And if Bryce can be that, and there's no reason he can't be. There's no physical limitations for Bryce being a dominant player. I've heard people say, well, he can't bend like so-and-so. He's 6'7". You're not asking him to play the game the way that you ask Bubakar or Logan Thomas or David Bailey to play the game. You're going to ask him to play more of a power game. Like you watched the 2 greatest pass rushers of my lifetime. Like when I was with an NFL fan. And look, J.J. Watt was tremendous. He was a great pass rusher, and his brother's a great passer. I mean, there's Michael Strahan. The 2 greatest of my lifetime, just the 2 most dominant edge rushers I've ever seen, is Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White. And I don't know that it's close, with all due respect to J.J. Watt. Now, I will say this just real quick. If J.J. Watt had not got hurt, I think he could have ended his career in this conversation. But he had, 5 good years, and then the injuries kind of kept him from a couple seasons. But those are the 2 most dominant of my lifetime. They did it very differently. I mean, there's times you can see Lawrence Taylor just getting underneath the tackle in an impressive fashion. Well, Reggie's not doing that. He's a different athlete. You're seeing Reggie use his club to throw a guy, a 315-pound tackle, just throw him 5 feet. It was amazing watching him play. There's different ways to get after the quarterback. Bryce is a power rusher. He can do speed to power, but he's going to win with power moves, counter moves, not just that twitchy bending around the edge. It's a different type of dominance. And so you have to understand that when you're evaluating him, and you're like, well, Bubakar does this, and I don't see Bryce Young do that. Yeah, I know, because they're different players. And so, but it's about taking your skill set, maximizing it, and becoming the dominant player that we all know you're capable of being. I think we saw strides from Bryce this spring. And one of the things that I've been told from sources is big problem for Bryce is really number one is he's got to be more. I don't know that Bryce Young realizes how good he is. That's kind of one of the conversations I've had with some folks around Notre Dame is we think Bryce can be a stud, but Bryce doesn't think that. He puts a lot of pressure on himself. He's trying to live up to who I am and who my dad was and the expectations on me. What Notre Dame's trying to do is like, dude, forget all that noise. Just be you and develop the way that we're trying to get you to develop. And when he just relaxes and doesn't overthink it, because he's also a really smart intellectual kid. I think sometimes he overthinks things, paralysis by analysis type of thing, where it's like, hey, man, you're not Bryant Young. You're not Isaiah Foskey. You're not Justin Tuck. You're not Stephon Tuitt. You're not Bubakar. You're Bryce Young. Be Bryce Young. And that's the only expectation that you need to live up to is who you are. And the more he does that and the more he just doesn't overthink everything, I think that's when it goes on. Because, here's my prediction for Bryce Young, and I don't know when it is, but there's going to come a moment. It's either going to be in fall camp or during this season or during next season. There's going to come a moment when the light just goes on for Bryce. And he's going to go from being a good player to a dominant player like that. I don't know when that moment's going to come, but I feel it's going to come because I feel like Bryce is the thing holding Bryce back right now. Just be you. Don't live up to any other standard. Don't live up. Nobody cares about expectations. Don't care what the fans think. You be you. Trust the coaching, and then let her rip. And when he does that, Trev, it's going to be a fun thing to watch. A very fun thing to watch. I hope it's sooner rather than later. I hope that light goes on before they head out to Provo. But he's got that kind of tools. It's just now it's time to put it all together. And I would say the same thing is true for Keon Keeley.
Yeah, Keon Keeley is the other side of this conversation, man. We are, and again, this is just me, but we are now kind of past that point of like, oh man, it's so great. He was committed to Notre Dame and then he wasn't. And now it's back. And that is a fantastic story. Now it's time to be the football player that we think that you're able to be. Because narratives can only get you so long. You know what I'm saying? And it's a great storyline. I don't want to discredit it. But now that he's back in the Notre Dame uniform, now that he's back going through practice and kind of that honeymoon phase of like, thank goodness you're back at the place where a lot of us believe that you should have been in the first place. Now it's like, hey, you can almost be this trifecta of a really, really dominant three-man defensive end rotation. He's another player similar to Bryce. It's like, hey, man, you got the physical tools. There's no question about it. There's a reason why you were a five-star recruit coming out of high school. There's a reason why the other person in the conversation of your recruitment was Nick Saban at Alabama and why he wanted you to come to Tuscaloosa. There's a reason for all of this. Now, a little bit different.
Ohio State was another team that was trying to flip him as well. So Larry Johnson was a guy that was also going after him.
100%. And we know his track record in Columbus. That is absolutely for sure. But now it's to the point where, and it's a little bit different from Bryce because with Keon, some things had to be broken down a little bit before they could get built back up, whereas Bryce kind of just has to get out of his own way. Keon's a different beast when it comes to that conversation, but man, one thing's for sure. In the moments where he had clarity in what he was doing this year, you saw that. You saw that five-star kid come back out, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's the guy that we remember. Now it's time for him to take that next step and be that guy on a more consistent basis.
And I think consistency is going to be the key. And we've talked about this. Keon showed up as a guy that really didn't know what he was doing. I mean, just simple things like know this alignment in the defensive line and know this call, and just you make a call and he just lines up wrong and you correct him. Does he know what we're saying? Do you know what this term means? And to see the growth he made throughout the spring was good. It was important. And like the spring game, I didn't think Keon was dominant. I thought he was steady. And you know what, Trev? That's actually more important to me than Keon going out there and having a couple sacks and then a couple plays where he just looks lost. I thought he was pretty steady because once he gets steady down, then the other part will come. We've seen all that already. It's just like Keon's got to continue to put in the work. That's going to be the big thing. The only person that's going to keep Keon Keeley from being an impact player for Notre Dame in 26 and 27 is Keon Keeley. That's it. The tools are still there. Is he the twitchy guy that he was coming out of high school? We'll see. I mean, I don't know that I quite saw that, but I saw plenty of twitch for a guy that's 265, 270 pounds. You know, continue to refine your body, continue to put in the work, continue to understand what it takes to be a great player. It's not just about the gifts God gave you. It's about you putting in the work to maximize the gifts that God gave you. And that's what Keon's learning. And I think we saw growth this spring, but there's another big jump that he's got to make if he's going to be a difference maker. Right now, I'm fully confident that Keon Keeley will be a good backup defensive end this year. He'll be able to come in, give some good minutes, get some pressures. He'll have some wins just like we saw with Alabama last year. But is he that kind of guy that you're looking at saying like, okay, they don't miss a beat when Keon Keeley's on the field? They don't miss a beat when Rodney Dunham's on the field. They don't miss a beat when, whoever's on the field. That's where Keon's still got to grow. Right now, Keon Keeley's a good depth player. I think that's, good, solid depth player right now. But I think he's capable of being more than that. And that's what he needs to go prove and show and develop into between now and the fall. But the tools are still there. That was the big question mark I had coming in the year, Travis. Are we still going to see the tools? Like, can he still be that guy? And there's more work needed now, I think, than there would have needed if he would have come to Notre Dame out of high school and be much further along right now. But that's not where we're at. That's not real life. That's wishful thinking. If I could go back and change this. Well, you can't, because the last time I checked, time machines hadn't been invented yet. Make for cool movies, but they're not in real life. So it's about, this is where we are now. Go build on it and become the best player you can be. You got 2 years to become the best version of yourself. I'd rather it not wait 2 years to get there. I'd rather you kind of start getting to that point now. But that's going to be a big key for them, Travis. And then the other question is, what are they going to do with Logan Thomas? Because here's two things that I think are true about Logan Thomas. Number one, he's super explosive and athletic. Number two, he's not an every down end right now. I don't care how hard he tries and how much strength he has. He's not a guy that I want to go to Provo, Utah and say, okay, you're going to give me 25 first and second down reps a day. Nope. But he's also a guy that's just too talented to not have some kind of role. He can play some first and second down snaps, but do you adjust your calls when he's in the game? Do you almost treat it more like an odd front when he's in the game, where he's more of a stand-up type of guy when he's in the game? Those are all questions that they're going to have. Is he more of a sub-package guy? I feel like a good defensive coordinator and a good defensive line coach should be able to look at Logan Thomas and say, we're going to find a role for this kid because he's just too athletic. Yes, because here's what not good defensive coordinators do. They look at the things and say, well, he can't do this, he can't do this, and he can't do this. Therefore, we're not going to play him much. But I'm going to harken back to a conversation I had with Clark Lee. This is back when he was the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, and he and I had a great conversation. We sat there and talked ball for a couple hours in his office. And one of the things that Clark Lee said to me was, when they kind of were building the team and they came back and they were looking at that version, I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020. I think it was 2019. Actually, it would have had to be 2019 because I wouldn't have been there in 2020. I was somewhere else in 2020, starting this in 2020. But I remember him saying to me, he's like, they were in a meeting and his coaches kept talking about players and they just kept talking about, well, he can't do this, can't do this. And he said, hey, I had to stop the meeting and say, hey, guys, stop telling me what this kid can't do or what that kid can't do. All I want to know from you is, what can they do? We're not going to build our defense around what they can't do. We're going to build our defense around what they can do. And that's what good coaches do. And so if you're looking at a kid like Logan Thomas and your conversation is, well, he can't do this, he can't do this, and he can't do this, you're missing the mark there. That'd be great if he could do all those things. But instead, focus on this. What can he do? And say, we're going to find a role for him to do that. He's going to need to give us some stuff here in base downs, but I'm not going to ask him to just step in for Bubakar and do the exact same things for Bubakar. So maybe when he's in the game, we go with an overall big boy personnel and say, we're going to do some more odd fronts and let him be more of a stand-up guy in those situations. And now you're using his strengths and his skill set as an advantage. So that's something that's going to tell us a lot about Chris Ash, is you look at certain guys, Logan Thomas being an example, and say, okay, well, he can't do this, so we don't play him? Or do you say he can do this, and we're going to find ways to utilize that? And Logan Thomas is the epitome of that type of decision-making and coaching. this season. It says, well, Rodney's ready, so we're just going to put Logan on the bench. That's bad coaching. That's wasting your resources. You know, Trev, like if you had a Ferrari in the driveway and a Lamborghini in the drive in the garage, you know, like just gonna say, well, you know, this one's out here. Or you can say, hey, I'm gonna use both of them. I'm gonna drive both of them. I'm gonna take advantage of both of them. They bring different aspects, or so, you know, maybe a Porsche and then I don't know, like a Hummer. You know, like this fully loaded. Hey, they're both great. They do very different things. They have different strengths and weaknesses. But when I drive them, I'm not going to treat my Ferrari like I treat my Hummer and vice versa, you know, and, you know, that's what good coaches do. And I hope that Chris Ashes and Charlie Partridge are good enough coaches to say, hey, these are the players we have. We're going to utilize them. What's my motto, Trev? Coach what you have, recruit what you want. You have Logan Thomas. Use them appropriately. And don't be like, well, this is what we do. This is our scheme. Well, supposedly you're a good football coach. You know, you get paid like a good football coach. Well, good football coaches can look at a kid and say, this is what he does well. Let's use it. And I hope they're able to find some answers with Logan Thomas. If they can't, now you're down a good football player. If they can, then you can take advantage of what he does well and minimize the things that he doesn't do well. It's a guy that's 220 pounds. From what I'm told, he eats. He just can't gain the weight. You know, I'm like, does this kid like not eat? And they're like, no, trust me, he eats. He does everything. He just, for whatever reason, just can't gain the weight. It's unfortunate, but it's just a kid that also ran like a sub 11 100-meter dash in high school. You know, like use it. If you can't find a way to get Logan Thomas on the field, if he's healthy, then I got to question whether or not, you know, you're really that guy as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, Logan Thomas is kind of the conundrum in the room because he has all of the, just on paper, the physical tools to be a very, very twitchy, very effective edge rusher. There's a reason why he was on the field as a true freshman against Georgia in the waning moments of the Sugar Bowl, a team who FanDuel now has ranked as their second favorite to win the SEC again. Yeah, so there's reasons why he got those opportunities, but I'm with you. They have to find ways to be able to utilize them. And some of those go into our next conversation here, Brian, of like keeping up with the theme of what's next. It's continuing to improve pass rushing techniques, using your hands to win, building up your repertoire of counter moves. All of those things are going to be huge. And I think a player like Logan Thomas could benefit from some of those things because maybe going through those drills, you see something of like, okay, well, now I see something that he can do that the other guys outside of maybe Bubakar can't do. And I think that's going to be huge for their ascension as a unit.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I think we saw strides in that area, Trev, where they're using – that was a big point of emphasis for Charlie Partridge in the practices we saw. Hand play. Big point of emphasis. We saw a little bit of it in the spring game. I want to see more of it. That's going to be a big piece. I agree with you. I think if they can get to the point where, you know, hey, these guys are capable of – they've got athleticism, they've got power, they got size, they got all these traits. If they can become even more technically advanced, I think you're going to see this room be really good when it comes to getting after the quarterback and shutting down the run game. And look, we've talked about question marks, Trev. We've talked a lot about the depth chart, and we know who's in it. But I do think one of the things that we talk about moving forward is I don't think it's a given that here's the 2, here's the 3, here's the 4, here's the 5, and here's the 6. I think they're going into fall camp with a lot of battles on the D-line for who's going to be where. I think there's a pretty good chance that Bryce Young's going to be a starter. But is Bryce Young a starter that dominates the reps, or is Bryce Young a starter that splits reps? And if he's splitting reps, why? Is it because he's really good and the next guy's really good and you're trying to keep the pressure off of both of them from a volume standpoint? Or is it because he hasn't made the jump and the other guy hasn't made the jump and they're just neither of them are necessarily difference makers? There's all these different types of evaluations and questions that have to go into this. So I think the one thing we do know is Bubakar is going to be the left end. I think we can, confidently say that. And then now the question is like, who's going to be the right end? And, that's going to be a question that's going to have to be determined. And even if you say, okay, well, I have a pretty good idea, I know who's going to be 3, 4, and 5. Okay, cool. But what order will they be 3, 4, and 5? I think those are all fair questions, Trev. And I'm actually going to pull up the post-spring depth chart right now so we can kind of talk about it just a little bit. But here's what I view it to be right now at this minute. Obviously Bubakar at the left end, Logan Thomas at left end, Rodney Dunham at left end, and Dom Hulek at left end, and then Bryce Young at right end, Keon Keeley at right end, Ebenezer Tade, and then Joe Reif at right end. Now, these positions are interchangeable to a degree where if you play left end, you can play right end. But when they're on the field, they usually stick to right and left end until they go to their sub packages, and then you'll see Bubakar move around a little bit more. So I think it's safe to say that that's what the 8 guys that are scholarship players are going to look like. But I think there's a lot of room for, okay, does Rodney become the number 2? Or does Logan become the number 2? Does Keon stay at number 2? Does Ebenezer kind of push him a little bit? Does Joe Reif push Ebenezer, or is Ebenezer pushing Joe Reif? I think those are all fair questions. Does Keon Keeley perform in a way where he's so much better than the 4th D end that you're like, we got to cross-train Keon left and right so he can sub for Bubakar and he can sub for Bryce? I think, do you do that with Rodney? I think those are all things that you look at and say, there are still some questions when it comes to what the depth chart is going to look like. Even if we can identify the bodies, I don't know that we necessarily know the order in which guys are going to go in and then the volume of snaps that they're going to get when they get in there. So I think that is still one of those remaining questions that we got to look at as we move forward.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, in a perfect world, you want Bryce Young to kind of emerge as that clear-cut number 2 starter, and then they rotate because of what you brought up. It's because Keon is forcing his way onto the field, not because, with all due respect to a member of the 2024 team, you would prefer Bryce Young as more of that Khalid Kareem starter, not the RJ Oben starter, where it's just like, yeah, like he's nice. He's a good player. We can trust him to go out and do things to a certain degree, but the guy waiting in the wings is, going to surpass him at some point. We just don't know when. And so I'm with you. I'm very interested to see how the rest of this depth chart shakes out. Ideally, you're in a position where Michigan was in 2023, where you just have 4 defensive ends that all have to play, and then they all end the season with 26 or more pressures, because that's exactly what Michigan did in 2023. So ideally, that's where you're at. To your point, steps need to continue to be taken. But, man, I mean, it's just, we can sit here and talk about it, and it's different when you put it on an outline, and then it's very different when you just look at it on paper and what the the depth chart overall is going to look like. Mm-hmm. Stuff still has to pan out, but I'm with you, man. I'm really hoping they continue to start taking these next steps, because this DN room could be very special this upcoming season. Yeah. That's for sure.
It's very talented. It's very tall. It's very long. It's very athletic. It's got all the talent in the world. It's got a very heavy North Carolina flavor to it. But it's a talented group. There's no doubt. No doubt.
Brian, there are some other things that we have to talk about. Here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we just got done talking about, our spring recap, almost kind of the state of the current room. But that's not going to be the end-all, be-all for Notre Dame's defensive end room in its entirety. You have to be able to continue to stack. Now, in that previous graphic that you brought up, everybody has junior year eligibility or less. But let's be real about something. If Bubakar has the season we believe he's capable of having, if Bryce Young has a season that he's capable of having, same thing with Keon Keeley, there's a very, 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 very strong possibility that none of these guys are on the roster past 2027. And so that leaves you in a spot where it's like, okay, does Logan Thomas take some sort of a red shirt, or does he continue being a special teams guy? Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Tade are going to be going into their junior years. And if they're the players we think they could be, that could be their final years, depending on how that shakes out. So then you start talking about depth, and it starts to look real thin, which is why the future of this room is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. It is funny, Trevor. There's only 2 classes of eligibility on the roster. There's 4 juniors and 4 freshman eligibility players. That's it. To your point, the 4 junior eligibility players literally cannot be on the roster beyond 2027. They're going to be gone. So going into the current 2027 recruiting classes, redshirt freshman or sophomore seasons, it's guaranteed, barring medical issues with Bryce or Logan, that Bubakar, Logan Thomas, Bryce Young, and Keon Keeley will all be off the roster. to your point, there's a chance that one or two of these guys are off the roster next year, depending on how they are. I don't think any of us really – I don't want Bubakar to be back in 2027 because that means he didn't go out there and dominate the way that we think he can and become a first-round draft pick and then lead a elite defensive line. I may be different than some people. Like, I want guys to be so good that it's like it doesn't make sense to come back as a senior year. Like, would you want Jeremiah Love back as a senior? Of course you would. But the only way that was going to happen is either A, he gets hurt, or B, he's not as good as we think he could be, and he has a disappointing season. Well, okay, I'm not willing to sacrifice that to have a guy for an extra year. I'd rather just get your great year now, and then best of luck to you. Go dominate in the NFL, and now it's time for Rodney Dunham to step up, or Ebenezer, or Keon, or whoever else. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trev, is you kind of want those things to happen. But to your point, the depth chart's going to get turned over a lot very quickly. And so the four guys after that, looking at the two redshirt freshmen, Dom Hulak and Joe Reif, and then the two true freshmen, Ebenezer Utade and Rodney Dunham, it's kind of like, okay, are they truly ready to dominate that position group? And then also just the other part of it is great teams don't, the great teams don't just sit back and say, well, we got a couple guys, we're good to go. You're getting to the point now where you got to start building this depth chart to where you're just reloading every year. And what's hurt Notre Dame in the past is they would lose one of their high-level players, a Justin Tuck, a Victor Abiamiri, a Stephon Tuitt. You could even count Aaron Lynch in this conversation, but more so Stephon, who had been there longer. You look at an Isaiah Foskey. You look at guys like that. Now we look at anything pre-Bubakar and say, well, when they would lose really good players, there was always a drop-off, and sometimes a significant drop-off because the roster wasn't built to reload. They would land their fair share of players, but then they would have a drop-off. And what's funny is the only time we saw a reload, it was a very quick reload. So in 2019, obviously, Notre Dame had an absolutely stacked defensive line room. And you had Bubakar, you had Khalid Kareem, Julian Okwara, you had Adi Takumba Ogundiji, Dalen Hayes, Jameer Jones. Then Khalid goes to the NFL. Julian goes to the NFL. And the next year, you just reload with Adi Takumba Ogundiji and Dalen Hayes. Well, then they leave, and you only moderately reload because you reloaded at one spot with Isaiah Foskey, but you didn't reload in the other spot. And then your depth was a lot shakier. And then you went through a couple years of being okay at end. You had to go to the portal to get Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Had they not got him out of the portal, who knows what that defensive line would have looked like in 2023. And you just haven't been in position to kind of reload. I think they're in a position to reload to a degree once Bubakar and Bryce and Keon leave, but it's kind of like you're going to have to hit the inside straight. You're going to need both Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utade to be hits and then pray that they don't get hurt. And that's why I think 27 and 28 recruiting is so important, Trevor, because this is one of the few positions left on the roster since Marcus Freeman arrived that they're not stacking classes. They're stacking classes at quarterback now. They're stacking classes at running back. They're getting really close. If they can finish on a particular player in the 27 receiver class, the stacking classes there. You're stacking classes at tight end. I don't care what you think about Joe Rudolph as an offensive line coach. Due to stacking classes from a recruiting standpoint. Linebacker has actually not been that needs to get back on track, but for a while they were stacking classes. Corner, they're stacking classes. Safety, they're starting to stack classes finally. The one position where I'd say that's the most unproven and untrue is defensive end. Now, defensive tackle also falls into this category, but we can have. They've been able to benefit from some of their quote-unquote better edge players end up becoming D tackles. So when you look at that, it's like, okay, well, I look at Chris Burgess as an inside guy. D-line as a whole, but especially D-end, is where Notre Dame has struggled to really stack classes back to back to back. You got your best D-end haul in 30 years. Well, I shouldn't say that. You got there's only one other defensive end group in the last 30 years that can compare, in my opinion, with Rodney and Ebenezer as a 1-2. And that's the 2011 group with Stephon Tuitt and Aaron Lynch and Eshaq Williams. You also had a great class in 2016 with Khalid Kareem, Julian Aguara, Dalen Hayes, and Adi Tukumbo-Gandiji. So those classes had better depth, but you won't find a necessarily better 1-2 punch, in my opinion, than what you got from those two kids last year. Now it's like, okay, but can you do it again? Because that's what the best teams do. They don't just have one great year and then like, okay, well, we're good for the next 3-4 years. I can hang out during recruiting season and just, chill out for a couple of years because we've got our ends. This isn't the NFL draft where you don't, well, we spent, first round draft pick on DN the last couple of years. We're not going to do that again. Well, the nice thing about college football compared to the NFL is you do keep doing that because you're not using a draft pick. You're going out and signing a guy. You're using money to get guys. So when you look at this, Trev, I think it's imperative that Notre Dame is able to build on what they did in the 2026 class.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's going to put them in a spot where they can begin to stack classes at a position that's very, very crucial to winning a national championship. I'm with you completely. Now, like we know, they are in a pretty good position right now in the 27-28 class, but obviously closing has to be done. And I think where you start that conversation is you're going to have to put a really good product on the field this year. We've seen other position groups kind of follow suit with that. You listed the positions that they're starting to stack classes. Cornerback. Well, the product on the field at cornerback in South Bend has been pretty good the last couple of seasons. You know what I mean?
And what are those kids doing, Trev? They're going to the NFL, and they're playing in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Cam Hart goes to the NFL, starts. Benjamin Morrison's a second-round draft pick. Leonard Moore's being projected as first-round draft pick. So, yes, same thing with the nickels, same thing with the safeties. These guys are now going to the NFL. They're getting drafted. They're playing and they're starters in the NFL. That's about that product on the field. Absolutely has changed. And now kids know I can go to Notre Dame and play cornerback and be in a high NFL draft pick and be a star in college. Do you feel that way about the defensive end position, Trev?
No, not yet. Not yet, which is why the things are so crucial about them coming to fruition. We talked about in the first two parts of the show today. But the next step of that is putting that product on the field this year. It is Bubakar stepping into stardom.
Exactly.
It is Bryce Young panning out. It is Keon Keeley electing to leave Alabama, a team that made the playoffs last year, whether we agree with it or not, and then becoming that rotational player. Which, by the way, disclaimer, we absolutely don't. We absolutely don't. I didn't lose to Indiana by 35 points anyways. But that's the point of this. You have to be able to put the product on the field. I think that is what recruits can go through and look at. That's why receiver, when CJ Carr stepped in at quarterback, that's why we wanted to see the elevation of play at the wide receiver room to start being able to get and land recruits like them being able to hopefully close on Julius Jones Jr. That's why it was such a big deal that they landed Caden Finley and Devin Fitzgerald and Bubba Frazier in the 2026 cycle. If the defensive end room can follow suit this year, when young recruits, especially once we start getting into the weeds with guys like Abraham Cisse and Jackson Vaughn and Cam McGee and Darian Prescott, if they can go and watch Bubakar and Bryce and Keon and Ebenezer and Rodney and be like, yeah, I could be that for that defense, I think that's when you're going to start seeing these classes follow suit.
In 27 is super important, Trev. It's super important. You talk about what product you put on the field this year is going to have a big impact on recruiting, but will it have a big impact on 27 recruiting? I don't think so, because these guys are going to be decided. So if you can't really influence the 27 class with the product you put on the field, how do you do it? Well, next step is you got to have great recruiting from your coaches. And we're hearing great feedback about Charlie Partridge and just the relationship that he had. Somebody in the chat mentioned it earlier, and they're spot on. Hear a lot of really positive feedback from recruits about sitting down with him, talking ball. Him and also Nick Sebastian plays a role in this. And the ability to say, hey, look, here's our vision for you. Here's how we're going to develop you. Then they watch him in practice. He's coaching all the time. He's on his players, but he's not just a yeller and a screamer. We've been at several practices. That's just kind of not who he is. And he doesn't have that reputation of just being an in your face. He's not, I won't even say it, but he's a teacher. He's intense, but he's a teacher. So I think you need that. They've got to grind. They've got to, there was a comment from Marcus Fakatu, and I wish the people around Marcus Fakatu would just kind of have him stop talking to media, because he's saying some things you're just like, oh, buddy, that's not good. But a comment he made was, Charlie Parcher's has been really active and really on him. And he said the schools he's going to choose is going to be the one that's just on him the most. I think it was an article. I believe it was an article that was written by Kyle Kelly. A buddy of mine sent it to me last night. And, and so he's doing the things to get in the mix with these top players. Now it's about closing. You obviously have Marcus Freeman, who plays a big role in that, and then the recruiting staff. And then the final piece is, look, just here's the reality of it. Notre Dame does not have to be the max offer for all these kids. This is just, they don't. Like, very rarely does Notre Dame get a kid where they're the biggest offer. It happens, certainly, but it's not often. And like I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, you hear all these Penn State fans crying about Notre Dame and NIL and it's not fair and all this other kind of stuff, which is a cell phone. They just don't realize it yet. But what's funny is, like, 2 of the 3 players, I don't know about the third. That's an uncertainty to me, but I know for a pretty strong feeling, close to a fact as like you could possibly get to, that 2 of the 3 players that Notre Dame beat Penn State for last year, Penn State offered more money. But here's the reality. If a kid's getting offered, I don't know, $600,000 from school A, you can't offer them $150,000 to $100,000 and expect like to really win that one. You've got to be competitive. And that's the expression that Notre Dame uses with recruits. It's like, look, we're going to be competitive. If it comes down to like, we've got to pay you more than anybody else, this may not be the place for you, but we're going to be competitive. So the combination of being willing to spend, because defensive linemen, Brian Smith has talked about this since NIL started. It is not cheap to get top defensive linemen. It's not. And if Notre Dame wants to put together the classes they need to put together on that position, you got to be willing to pay. And you've got to have coaches that are willing to do the work on the recruiting trail to convince those kids to be here, because that's the role they play in recruiting is so important. It's because if you're not doing your job in recruiting and it just comes down to money, then you're going to have to max out the offer. If you're like, buying players requires you to give the most amount of money. Where it becomes advantageous to you is if you do a great job and you crush the recruitment, you've got the head coach in place, you've got the D-line coach in place, you've got the recruiting staff, you can point to this result, you can point to that result, you can lay out the vision, you can talk about the 4 for 40 or 4 for forever now is what their motto is now. All that stuff has a big say in how much that kid is willing to take as a discount to come play for you compared to somebody else. That's why the recruiting piece is so important. And I'm happy that so far the Notre Dame staff has not been lazy and just been like, well, we'll just go buy him. Because that gets way more expensive. If you recruit your tail off, if you recruit your tail off, you're not getting a stud defensive end for gift cards. You know what I mean? Like, it's still going to cost you money, but maybe you don't have to match the Texas A&M offer. You just got to get in the ballpark. You don't have to match the offer from this SEC school or that Big 10 school or that Big 12 school that's offering a kid a big deal. You just got to get in the ballpark if you've done the job recruiting. If you don't do the job recruiting, then it comes down into a bidding war, and that's not where Notre Dame wants to be. So it is still very, very important that the coaching staff do the work to build those relationships to make sure that you're getting kids that are bought into the right things and that you don't always have to max out your dollar amount to get a kid. So I think those things are super important, Trev. Now let's talk specifics. I think this 27 class, defensive end class, in my opinion, is the most important position that Notre Dame needs to hit home runs in this entire class. Quarterback's important, running back's important, receivers important, tight end, O-line, D-tackle is probably 1B. And I will say it is 1B. Linebacker, corner, all those are important. I think there's nothing more important than another dominant class up front. And today we're going to focus on the defensive ends. They're in a position to have an elite class in 2027. They just got to close. And it starts with Aiden O'Neal. And what's interesting is the way that they're pitching the defense to him and some of the other players we'll talk in a minute. I do think we're going to see in the future Notre Dame would like to be more multiple with its fronts and how they use the big end type of player. But getting a guy like Aiden O'Neal, it's a top 100 to 150 caliber player, it's a great place to start. So you got on the board, and we broke him down the other day, so you can go check out that breakdown. But now you get into that next one, and now it's about how do you finish off the 27 DN class. There's 2 guys right there that, to me, are absolute must-gets. One of them is Abraham Cisse from Pennsylvania. You have to close out and get Abraham Cisse. He's an absolute must in this class.
Without a doubt. When you start looking at building classes and stacking classes, and I like Aiden O'Neill. We broke down his film. You talked about how he's like a top 100, top 150 guy. Said he reminded me of Josh Burnham from 2024. Similar play styles. I thought they brought a lot of similar skill sets to the table. But fact of the matter is
already as big as Josh.
Literally won't have to go through that transition of like going from like linebacker, quarterback in high school to defensive end in college. So there's a lot of things to like. But if Notre Dame wants to be a habitual national championship favorite like they are in FanDuel right now, you're going to need more than just an Aiden O'Neill. And that's what Abraham Cisse brings to this class. He is that top-level, long, lengthy, twitchy edge rusher that Notre Dame is going to need if they want to continue stacking classes. And he's a really, really impressive kid.
Well, and they've been his leader for a while. And when you are able to get on top for a kid like that, you've got to close. It's an absolute must. And look, everything about Abraham Cisse tells us he's a Notre Dame kid. He gets it. His mom is very much into the things that Notre Dame has to offer. He's very much into things that Notre Dame has to offer. You know, he's a Pennsylvania kid, so I think he's more I think Downington is Eastern PA. I believe he's closer to Philly than he is Pittsburgh, but still, it's Pennsylvania. It's not that far, you know, and so it's not like having to go down south. When you have a stud like him in the north, you got to get him. You know, there's a world in which Notre Dame can have an elite defensive end class and a defensive line class, and all of them are from above the Mason-Dixon line. Like, that is rare. And when that's a reality, you've got to hit a home run. And that's another piece of this. If you think about it, Notre Dame could get two ends from Jersey, an end from Pennsylvania, and two Chicago defensive tackles, and have the best D-line class in the country. That's not going to happen every year, Trev.
No.
It is unique in 27 and 28, though, where you have those opportunities. And so when you look at a kid like Abraham Cisse and you say he fits everything we're looking for as a player, like off the field. Then on the field, he's 6'5", he's 225, he's twitchy, he's explosive, he can bend, he's got the ability to do counter moves like athletically, and he's just scratched, and he plays with a motor. This is a big time player, and I believe that to be the case. I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade, or a 4.5-star grade, top 50 caliber player. He's even higher than the top 75. He's a top 50 player. He's closer to 5-star than he's 4.5-star. Easy 5-star upside. But he's also ranked as the number 16 player in the country by On3 and Rivals. He's also ranked as the number 27 player in the country by 247 Sports. So it's not just Notre Dame people that think he's an impact player. Nationally, he's considered an impact player as well. And when you have guys like that and you're in a position like Notre Dame's in, you've got to close. You've absolutely got to close. And Abraham Cisse that's what makes him a must get. He's a difference maker. He is a Rodney Dunham type. He is a Bubakar type. He is what Keon was coming out of high school. What Bryce was coming out of high school. He is that game changer, difference maker, where if you're going to battle in a game and you've got, and we'll talk about some others, but you've got any combination of Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Tade and Abraham Cisse and Jackson Vaughn, who we'll talk about, and Aiden O'Neill and guys like that, you're going to have an elite defensive line class if those kids stay healthy and you've got a good coach. We believe they've got a good coach. But it's kind of one of those things like if that's your line rotation, there is no drop-off. Who's your starter? Doesn't matter because whoever's on the field is the starter, and that's how we expect them to play. So, as far as his recruitment, I still like where Notre Dame is at. Nothing has come up that's made me think, I'm not sure if they're as good of a place as they've been. The only thing that makes me concerned is he just won't make a decision. And he doesn't appear that he's kind of winding his recruitment down as of now. So that's the only concern you have, is just sometimes that can just change. Like, what's the holdup? What is it about Notre Dame that's causing him to not decide yet? Or is it nothing about Notre Dame and it's just about he's got his mindset on a process and he just wants to go through that process? That's fine. But as a recruiter, you do get a little bit nervous when that's the case. Like, what's the holdup? And every day that a kid's not committed is a day that the kid could change his mind. I mean, he could change his mind when he is committed, but so that's a little bit concerned, but you've got to get him. And then the other one is Jackson Vaughn. He was a must get in the 28 class. He's a must get in the 27 class. this is a big-time football player that Notre Dame has been on for a long time. Cisse wasn't really a guy that they got in a great place with until Charlie Partridge showed up. This is a kid that you've been on for a long time, and now that he's reclassified to 2027, the need to get him in this class has not diminished at all. This is a big-time talent that you've got to get.
Yeah, without a doubt, we're talking about a player with big-time ability, man. And again, it's adding to that ability to stack a class and getting Jackson Vaughn, getting Abraham Cisse on top of already having Aiden O'Neal in the class. That's a really good trio of edge rushers that you're bringing in, all with different skill sets too. They're not bringing in three of the same kid, which I also appreciate. I'm with you. Jackson Vaughn is going to be a huge get and would be a huge get for this class. I think, and there's a lot of recruiting updates that happen on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All the more reason to be in tune with that, what we're doing over there on the premium site. But Brian, where, as things stand right now, are they with Jackson Vaughn?
Well, I think they're in a great place with Jackson Vaughn, and I don't care what the recruiting services say. He's as much of a non-top 100 player as Champ Mons is a non-top 100 player. Like, this is a big-time player. I saw a write-up that one of the On3 guys did about why they dropped him in the rankings, and I just had to chuckle. I mean, it sounds super familiar to the bullcrap they were saying about, like, Drake Bowen and CJ Carr, and you're just like, you guys just don't have a clue. This is a big-time football player. There's no doubt about it. And, I mean, you think about the schools that are pushing for this kid as a reclass. You know what I mean? Like Notre Dame, LSU's trying to make a hard run. Michigan's trying to make a hard run. Like, this is a big-time football player. And he's a Notre Dame kid, Notre Dame family. You know, mom, from what I understand, is on board with Notre Dame. Kid loves Notre Dame. He's a very talented football player. And even as a reclass, I have him as a top 50 player. He was like to me, it's top 50, top 75, even as a reclass. And I fully expect him to be top 50 as we see the growth that he's made, you know, kind of in his third year. But big time player, they're in a good position. It's the same thing with Abraham Cisse. You just got to close. And, you know, Jackson says all the right things. And I think the Notre Dame is his clear leader right now. But again, the longer that a kid stays uncommitted, the more risk that there is that he doesn't. That doesn't mean they're not going to get him. Rodney, you know, Joey O'Brien didn't commit. He was a guy that Notre Dame had wanted and thought they were going to get early in the process, and then trended another direction, ended up getting him in the end anyway. And he didn't commit till, you know, June. So that's okay. I mean, Elijah Golden didn't commit till August last year. It's okay if that's what he wants to do, but you do get a little bit nervous because right now there's other edge players that Notre Dame is not pushing for right now that you're going to miss out on because you're waiting on these two. So there's some risk involved, but I would say they're too good and they're too important to your future of your program to panic and take somebody else. You see it through. And because the reality is some of the other players that they may miss on, you can flip guys like that down the road. These two are the must-gets. You want to stack classes the way that elite teams do. Cisse and Vaughn are the keys to that, adding them with Aiden O'Neal.
Now, I do know in the 2027 cycle, Brian, there are a couple of like dual threat options to where like if you don't and like the land the like pure edge like a Cisse or a is there a place they can turn to?
Yeah, there are. There's some guys that you could say, you know, do you take a third D tackle knowing that like a Marcus Fakatu or a David Fuller-Runshu want to kind of, you know, get a shot at playing big ends? You could do that. And I think you still, even if you land Cisse and Vaughn, you still sell that to those two guys because I do think there are some things that Notre Dame would like to do. And if I'm right about this, we have not seen it a lot from Notre Dame yet. And based on what I am hearing them pitch to recruits is I think Notre Dame would like to get to a point sometime down the road where they can line up in sort of odd fronts at times with 3 down linemen and then kind of a stand-up guy somewhere else, which would require guys like Marcus Fakatu and David Fuller-Runshu to be able to play over the tackle more than just playing over centers and guards. And they've talked to them both about those positions. So I think they kind of fit into this mold a little bit too, either as, okay, well, we're going to take that third D tackle, you know, and or like you do something that's like, okay, we're going to give Fakatu a legitimate shot to play D end, and we're going to go get Xavier Muhammad as a hybrid guy as well. So I think those guys provide you, their flexibility provides you some, I'd rather turn there and then focus all my energy on Darian Prescott and Cam McGee next year kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it boils down to you got to get Cisse and Vaughn. You've got to get those guys. That's how you stack classes. And then when you look at the 28 class, what's interesting, Trev, is it's another year where there's a lot of talented players in very pro Notre Dame areas. We've talked about Chicago with Cam McGee, Darian Prescott. You've got to get one of those. If you can get both, great. But you've got to get at least one, in my opinion. And then also the North is once again loaded in 2028. You've got Arthur Jones and Cam Toomey from New York. You've got Asa Birch from Ohio. You've got Tyson Swan from Maryland, Tyseer Young from Delaware. I think Asa Birch is from kind of close. I think he went to the same high school as Marcus Freeman, or at least he's from the same area as Marcus Freeman. I forget which one it is. I think it's a similar area. But it's another strong year in the North. I just listed you 7 really talented defensive ends, and the furthest south of that one of them is like Delaware or Maryland, depending on which part of Maryland the kid is from. So when you look at those things and you talk about how talented the North is, again, there's 2 years in a row where the North is loaded with high-level ends. You've got to have big success if you're Notre Dame. It's imperative that you do that. Then if these guys are as good as you hope they are, then down the road and it's not as strong, you've built up the reputation as a defensive end factory as you can go anywhere you want to get top ends. But it's imperative that because you're in a 2-year stretch where it's loaded with northern ends that are big-time players, got to have success. You got to clean up with those guys, which means Cisse, which means Vaughn, which means one of Prescott or McGee at least. And you've got to hit home runs there. And we'll have a very similar conversation when we start talking D tackle in a couple days as well. It's a very similar story.
Look, man, I'm new to the whole recruiting game, and I'm starting to build up my repertoire and knowledge there. And this isn't me like, have you heard about this guy, Cam McGee? He's like a nationally recognized recruit in the 2028 class. Dude, Notre Dame has to land him. Well, obviously, I'm with you. One of Cam McGee or Darian Prescott, because they're both just freakishly talented. But the second you show me Cam McGee's film, that's my dude. How sometimes you have dudes in recruiting classes that you're just kind of yeah, that guy. Cam McGee in 2028 is that guy for me.
And I get that completely. He's a stud. That's how I feel about Cisse and Vaughn. I felt that about Vaughn in the 28 class, going back to when I saw him in Irish Invasion last year. I mean, he was one of the stars of Irish Invasion last year as a sophomore. And you're like, this guy's a dog. This guy's an absolute dude. And we saw other highly ranked guys. We saw Asher Giotto at the camp. We saw some big highly ranked guys at the camp, and Jackson Vaughn was the guy at that camp. But Cisse's that way. He's that kind of freaky, talented top 10 to 15 national player. Because if I was adding my upside grade into Cisse's grade and ranking, like the national services do, and again, it's not better, not worse, it's just different, he'd be a top 15 player minimum. He's got that kind of if it all pans out for Abraham Cisse, he's a top 10 NFL draft pick. And I feel the same way about Jackson Vaughn. He's a first-round caliber draft pick if it all pans out. He's a little bit different because he's a year behind, he's it's kind of the issue with reclassification. We're not going to get that 4th year, but just from a tool standpoint, he's a first-round draft pick caliber player. And you've got to get those guys. The only reason I say one of Prescott and Cam McGee is because Cam McGee, for whatever reason, he's going to have to be convinced that Notre Dame is a place to go to. I think he's kind of got his eyes set on, he's one of those Chicago kids that still believes the SEC is dominant, and you've got to convince him otherwise. That is kind of, in Ohio State's a big player there as well. So I think he's one of those kids, Trevor, where we talked at the beginning of the product you put on the field has to be big time. I don't think Darian Prescott needs to see that as much as Cam McGee does. I think Darian Prescott's more of a typical Notre Dame fit, Notre Dame kid, in that he thinks he's that. And from everything I've been told about Cam McGee, he would absolutely fit in well at Notre Dame. I don't think he sees himself as a Notre Dame kind of kid yet. Now, they made a big move with him during his visit, but there's a long way to go on that one. Darian Prescott's a little bit different. You got to get one of them. And if you get both of them, that's the ideal, perfect world. But if you want to get both of them, we go all the way back up to the beginning of this segment where we talked about you've got to put something special on the field. And we talk about even further back in the show, means Bubakar's got to have that breakout year, which means Bryce needs to kind of put it together, which means the freshmen need to come in and play. Because then you can go to like Cam McGee and Abraham Cisse if there's any wavering there, or if they are committed to you, it ends any suspense. But with the 28 guys, especially, it's like, hey, look, if you're a dog, hey, we got studs in our starting lineup. Like Bryce and Bubakar are going to be high draft picks, but guess what? Rodney's still doing his thing. Ebenezer's still doing his thing. Like, you're going to come here and play. If you're not the starter, you're still going to play, and you're going to play legit minutes. We're going to be counted on you to produce like a starter. I think that could have an even bigger impact on the 28 class than the 27. Actually, a significantly greater impact.
Agreed.
And I don't know that there's a player out there who it could impact greater than Cam McGee, who, again, I think he sees Notre Dame as a different type of program than Ohio State and some of the SEC schools, because I think Cam McGee's focus is more on the NFL right now, which I understand. So Notre Dame's got to show him, hey, man, you can do that too. You can do that too here. You don't have to go to Texas or LSU or Miami or Ohio State to do that. You can do that here and get all those other things that we sell you. So I think the 28 season for Cam McGee, and to a degree Darian Prescott, but even more so Cam McGee, is going to be huge. Absolutely huge.
Brian, to take us home here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we got a daily mailbag to take us home here. Now, we got done talking about defensive ends today. Theme for today's mailbag, folks, is DNs, whether it's at Notre Dame, past, present, future, across the country in college football, or if you have some recruiting questions, go ahead and throw those in the chat as well. You can always put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji prior to your submission. Lets us know to set that question aside. And as always, super chats get bumped up to the top.
And we'll start with All About Saturday, who had our first mailbag question for today.
How does Abraham Cisse compare to the current defensive ends on the roster?
Very similar to Bubakar, very similar to Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utada. He's cut from the same cloth, right? He's 6'4 plus, depending on where you see it. I've seen him listed at 6'4. I've seen him listed at 6'4.5. I've seen him listed at 6'5. I have him listed at 6'5 just because that was the first height that I saw for him. He's got long arms. He's extremely explosive, like Rodney, like Ebenezer, like Bubakar. He's got really heavy hands like Bubakar, like Rodney, like Ebenezer. He's twitchy. He can bend. He's got a great closing speed, Trev. I mean, we broke down his film. His ability to close in the quarterback is really impressive. I think he's right on par with Bubakar and Rodney and Ebenezer, not just from a ranking standpoint. That's obvious, but I'm more referring to his skill set and how he fits into Notre Dame. So if we kind of project beyond the Bubakar, Bryce Young, Keon era, and we they're all off into the NFL. They all got drafted. They're all making money. And we project to a world in which it's Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utade and Abraham Cisse and Jackson Vaughn and guys like that. You're talking about basically just kind of plug and play whoever's on the field. Now, Aiden O'Neal brings a little bit of a different skill set. Joe Reif will be part of the team then. He'll bring a little bit of a different power guy skill set. So you'll have some different skill sets. But those four guys, even though they're not cookie cutters of each other, are sort of in the same. If we're putting DNs into three categories, they're all in one category: explosive, twitchy edge rushers. And so I think that he fits in very, very well. He's probably a little bit longer than Rodney. I would argue he looks a little longer than Rodney does. Same type of twitch, same type of explosiveness, same type of potential as Rodney, Ebenezer, Bubakar. That's how I see Abraham Cisse, Trev.
Agreed. Same page. The long, twitchy edge rusher, freakishly long arms. Can't emphasize that enough. I'm with you.
Yep.
From Tommy Guns, over under 20.5 sacks from the defensive ends and then in the regular season, and then plus over under 6.5 sacks in the playoffs.
So let's look at the numbers. I mean, I'm leaning towards over, but I just want to kind of look at the numbers and see kind of where they were last year. So the defensive ends last year had 6.5, 9.5, 11.5, 12, 13, and 13.5. The DNs had 13.5 sacks last year, Trev, from the edge. It'd be a pretty good jump to get to 20.5. But I'll be honest with you, I think that I'd lean towards the over right now, because I think Bubakar this year gets half of that by himself. Like if Bubakar and Bryce don't get to kind of around where the whole D-line, the DN room was last year, I'll be a little disappointed if we don't get at least 13.5 sacks from Bryce and Bubakar combined, where Bubakar has 8 and Bryce has 15.5 or 15.5, 5.5, or Bryce has 10 and Bubakar Bubakar has 10 and Bryce has 4 or 5. If we don't get that type of production from those two this year, I'll be disappointed.
Yeah,
I'll be very disappointed. So I'm leaning towards the over. And then you get, Keon had 3 sacks last year, 1 or 2 from Logan Thomas and a couple from Rodney Dunham. And yeah, I think I'll take the over. In the playoffs, that's a little bit tougher because I anticipate Notre Dame only playing 3 playoff games. So that's over 2 a game. So I'll fingers crossed and say I'm going to hope by that one. And I hope that the DNs play in the playoffs next year the same way that Ruben Bain played in the playoffs this year for Miami, where he just went to another level, man. He just went to he just was in that zone where he just was like, yeah, I'm going to destroy you today. Sorry. I feel bad, but I'm going to have to embarrass you in front of your mommy and daddy, all game. That's pretty much what Ruben Bain did last year in the playoffs. So hopefully they do that. So I'll hope by that one, but I'm actually kind of, and maybe I shouldn't be this optimistic, but I do think we're going to see a much bigger jump or a much bigger level of production, much more productive defensive end rotation. Because, let's be honest, last year, the ends who you're bringing off the bench weren't sack guys outside of Josh Burnham. And they didn't really play him a ton until the second half of the year, and then he was very productive. But, Junior's a great player, great motor player, great rotation player, great depth player. You love him as a young man, but, he's not a game changer. He made some game-changing plays. We remember that from the Georgia game, but he's not a guy that you're going to have in your rotation and have 3 to 5 sacks. Kingston could be. I mean, not Kingston, but Keon could be. You didn't have a freshman last year that was going to go out and just put up numbers, 2, 3, 4 sacks. I wouldn't be shocked if the combination of Rodney and Ebenezer had 3 or 4 sacks this year. I wouldn't be shocked if Logan Thomas, if he's healthy, has a couple sacks this year. So, yeah, I expect more of this defensive end group this year. So, yeah, I'm going to go with the over on the first one. I'll hope go over the second one, but I'm more confident in the first one.
I'm also going to take the over in the regular season. I think it's kind of the perfect storm. One, Kingston's not going to be back 100% healthy, in my opinion, ready to rush the passer like he did last year in probably the first 3 to 4 games, nor do I think Notre Dame should use him as such. Work him back slowly, get him ready for when they take that trip out west of Provo. I also think Jalen Sneed and his kind of niche role, I think what he proved this spring is he can be a really good off-ball linebacker. So I don't know if they're going to use him as much. I still think they're going to bring linebacker pressures because I think they'd be doing those 2 guys a disservice. But I do think you're going to see more traditional defensive ends on third down because of the skill set in the room. Now, the area that I think that if I'm wrong on taking the over, I think it's because there's more production on the interior from a pass rushing standpoint. If guys like Armel continue to produce, I'm not going to dive too much into that now because that'll be a show for later on in the week. But if I miss the over 20.5 in the regular season, I think it's going to be because of sacks going to the interior defensive line, not to linebackers. But I'm still pretty confident right now in taking the over. In the regular season, playoffs, it's a little bit more difficult. I'm with you.
Yeah, I want to be clear on it because somebody in the chat said something like, well, if the Miami defensive ends can have 23, then the trio should be up 20.5. Well, the Miami duo did not have 23 in the regular season. So Keem Messidor finished the year with 12.5 sacks. 5.5 of those came in the playoffs, Trev. That's 7 sacks for him. And then Ruben Bain last year had 5 sacks in the playoffs, so he had 4.5 in the regular season. They only had 11.5 sacks between the 2 of them in the regular season. They took it to another. They looked great against Notre Dame, but then there was periods of the season where they just kind of disappeared. Messidor had some injuries, and Ruben Bain just kind of did Ruben Bain things where he just kind of disappears for a while. But they turned it on when it mattered. But yeah, they barely had over 10 regular season sacks. So yeah. That's just making sure we're on the same page there. But they were capable of doing that. That's what made them kind of frustrating at times. You had that much production, as a duo, you had over 10 sacks in 4 games, and yet that they almost matched their regular season numbers in 4 playoff games.
Yeah.
So they were monsters in the postseason. There's no doubt about that. But they weren't at 23 in the regular season. Just want to make sure we're clear on those numbers, because his question was regular season 20.5.
From DJ7, would you rather have a defensive end that is elite at pass rushing or elite at controlling the edge, assuming the other trait for each guy is just good?
So that's actually my answer to that's going to change with Chris Ash as the defensive coordinator than it would have under Al Golden. Because under Al Golden, I would rather have a guy who's an elite run stopper. Because I felt like Al Golden did so much blitzes, had so many different blitz packages and different things that if you didn't have great DNs, you could get pressure on the quarterback with your linebackers and your pressure packages. And then their defensive tackles had a lot of success rushing the quarterback. Under Chris Ash, this is going to sound backwards because he wants to have a great run defense, but I don't think he didn't. I wasn't impressed and blown away by his pressure packages last year from a creativity standpoint. And I don't love the fact that he likes to sim pressure so much, which is basically you're just showing pressure, not actually bringing pressure. So I think there is more, pun intended, pressure on the edge players to get to the quarterback more. And so I would, if you're good against the run and you're an elite pass rusher, I'm way more. I think that's a way greater need in this defensive system than it was before. And it's flipped because under Al Golden, I think you needed D tackles that were pass rushers because they weren't used to be run stuffers. Under Chris Ash, I'd rush my answer D tackles flipped. So my answer at both of them is kind of flipped a little bit under the new coordinator because I think the desire is to fit the defense. If you were asking my personal opinion, if I was running my own defensive philosophy, it'd be the same now. I'd rather have guys that are elite pass rushers first and good run defenders second. Just because I think setting the edge as a run defender, you can be good at it and you're going to be effective. If you're just a good pass rusher, it's about positioning. It's about know your job and having the right body positioning. Whereas pass rushing is more of you need a high-level skill set. So that would be my answer, Trevor.
Yeah, we see that the same. Specific for Notre Dame's defense right now, I would say being elite at pass rushing. If I was building my own defense, I would want defensive ends that are elite pass rushers. Because the goal of setting the edge in the run game is to funnel it back inside. It's not necessarily the defensive end making the play. We saw that in the 2024 Orange Bowl when they were playing Penn State. They allowed the linebackers to scrape over, fill the gap, and then make the plays when R.J. Oben and Josh Burnham and players like that were starting to set the edge. They weren't normally the ones making the tackle. And so, yeah, if I was making it, especially because of how the game is now, there's such a strong emphasis on passing and I think you need a counter. And the counter is not just having an elite corner. And we watched Notre Dame's defensive ends last season not get turned loose with elite corners. There's only so long you can cover players for. Need to be able to generate pressure, and that's why I'm going with that. I'm with you, man. From ND Football 115, I know you guys have talked about a possible lack of hip mobility in Ben from Aiden O'Neal when evaluating him. Do you think this makes it inherently hard to rush the passer, or just different?
Just different. It's so this is a good question, ND Football 115. Go back to the conversation we had about Bryce Young and Bubakar and the difference, kind of like the Reggie White versus Lawrence Taylor point that I was making. Here's the deal. I know that in the scouting world, there's buzzwords they all like to use. And when I mean scouting world, I'm not talking about the real scouts. I'm talking about the online Twitter scouts. And I'm not disparaging those people because that's what we are. I'm not a football coach anymore. So it's not that I'm saying something negative, but the reality is when you're in that world, you like to use words and phrases that make you sound like you're talking about. So anytime you hear of a defensive end, you almost hear every time, oh, he does speed to power really effectively. Well, I'm like, well, if everybody does it, then why are we talking about it? Because you guys always talk about this. Every guy's got the speed. Well, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? And I know that an NFL scout knows that. I know that Charlie Partridge understands what I mean, but I don't know that every, Twitter scout and talent analyst at 247 Sports and On 3 understand exactly what that means or the benefits of it, other than just it's a cool, thing to say. And so there's this like huge debate. We saw this nonsense on X about, well, look at his bend here and look at his shin angle and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm like, are you guys effing serious right now with this whole thing? Like, you guys are going back and forth and you're showing pictures of this guy at his pro day and pictures of this guy at his pro day to show the guy can or can't do this, that. Like, give me a freaking break, guys. Like, you're not asking Reuben Bain to rush the passer the same way you're asking David Bailey to rush the passer. They're different players with different skill sets. Just like if the Philadelphia Eagles would have signed Lawrence Taylor as a free agent, they wouldn't have been like, well, you're a replacement for Reggie White. They might have said, hey, we lost Reggie to the Packers. You're going to get his sack numbers, but they're not going to line him up at the same spot and say, play like Reggie. There's different ways to get after the quarterback. DeMarcus Ware and Von Miller were a great duo for the Broncos when they won the Super Bowl in 2015. Watch them play. They're not the same guy. There's some things they can both do well, but Von won with just explosiveness and power, where DeMarcus was kind of like that savvy veteran with all the different moves, because he didn't bend like he did when he was a younger guy with, coming out of college. So it's different, and you got to coach him different. Now, if your only way of coaching is, well, I coached Bubakar this way, so I'm going to coach Aiden O'Neal that way. Well, then you're not a very good coach. But it's just different. So it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. Now, there are certain moves that you don't have access to when you have a guy that's not super bendy. You can point that out. I mean, I'd love to have a 6'5", 265-pound DN that can bend. Everybody would. But it's not something where if you don't have that, you can't be a great pass rusher. It's different. It's different.
100% difference between like a finesse edge rusher and a power edge rusher. I'm with you completely. Both are effective. From Black Irish 864, our guy Christopher Galloway. Brian, which one of the defensive end plays the run game the best? Do you see teams running the ball more against our defense because of the talent that we have in the defensive backfield?
No. I think teams are going to still try to throw the ball on Notre Dame because that's where Chris Ash's defense is inherently more vulnerable. Just like, this isn't a shot at Chris Ash, just like teams were more willing to run the ball on Al Golden because that's where his defense was more inherently vulnerable. So you saw Louisville, for example, come out early in 2024 and gash Notre Dame with the run game early on because that's where it's vulnerable. Ohio State's game plan was very clearly run to set up the pass because that's where Notre Dame was vulnerable. So I think teams are going to go after the weakness of the scheme more so than, hey, this guy's really good, so we're just going to run the ball all day.
Sure.
I think his scheme is geared towards, we're going to stop your ability to run the football. So you're going to have to find ways to beat us in the throwing game. So I still think we'll see that. It's a good question.
Yep. Agreed. And then to answer your first part, Chris, which one of the defensive ends plays the run game the best? Right now, I think it's Bubakar. But on paper, it should be probably one of Bryce Young or Keon Keeley. Their skill sets is like bigger power ends should kind of be that. But as of right now, on May 5th, I think it's Bubakar. From Jay Melvin, Brian, what makes Cam McGee potentially better than Bryce Young, Keon Keeley, and Rodney Dunham? Is it better talent or mind because all of those guys were 5 stars? Is he a potential generational defensive end?
I don't know that I'm ready to put generational on it just yet. I don't like to use that word very often, and I've yet to see him play his junior year of high school. So I'm going to pump the brakes on that. What I would say is he is better than all those guys were as a sophomore. He's more powerful. He's even more explosive than what those guys were when they were sophomores. Bryce Young was barely 200 pounds as a sophomore. He might not have actually been 200 pounds as a sophomore. He didn't start to flash until he was a junior and then really broke out as a senior. So Cam's just further along. He's more advanced. Same thing with Keon Keeley and Rodney Dunham. Keon didn't really break out big time until his junior year, and then he was nasty. I mean, Notre Dame obviously got on him before that, but he really broke out as a junior. And so Cam's a different type of player than what Keon was as a sophomore as well. But put him in the same kind of category. I think you're kind of focusing on the better or anything like that. I don't know that I've ever said that he's better than those guys. I said he's the best D end in the country in the 2028 class and might be the best defensive end in all of high school football, including the 27 class last year. It's up for debate, but that doesn't have anything to do with like Rodney Dunham and Bryce Young and Keon Keeley. I think the thing that I would say about him compared to those three is he's much further advanced technically, power-wise, than what those guys were as sophomores. That's where it's at. Does he have the potential to be a generational D? Sure, but I want to pump the brakes on that until we see him play his junior year. But the tools are there for him to be a game changer. I don't really care about better or whatever. It's just, and here's the thing is, if he shows up at Notre Dame as a true freshman, he won't be better as a freshman than Rodney Dunham is as a junior.
Right.
But he may be better than Rodney was as a freshman. You know what I mean? So like it's not always, well, you rank this guy better than that guy, so he must play over him. Yeah, I ranked him better when he was a senior than that guy was a senior, but that guy's now a junior in college. He's a better player than, just like there may be a kid in the 2031 class that I think is the greatest defensive end I've ever seen. That doesn't mean he's going to be better as a freshman than what Cam McGee will be as a senior in high school.
Right.
That's the whole point of it, or that's a big part of it too, I should say. And this is a question from Jim Halloran, and he's referring to Rodney Dunham. Is Rodney Dunham going to be better than Bryce Young as a freshman? And what he was referring to is his freshman year compared to Bryce Young's freshman year. Because I asked him as a follow-up, like, wait a minute, are you asking me if he's going to be better as a freshman than what Bryce is as a junior? No, he meant compare that to his freshman year. I would say I'm optimistic towards that because Bryce was very raw fundamentally and technically. Rodney's much more advanced from a technical standpoint than Bryce was. So I think there's a chance that he could be better as a freshman than Bryce was as a freshman, certainly. But of course, there was no Bubakar and Bryce for Bryce to be competing against as a freshman because Bubakar got hurt so early, Patelho got hurt so early, so it's a little bit of a different deal. Bryce got to play a lot because of that. Rodney, he's going to have to earn it, obviously, but yeah, he could be.
For sure. From Salty, which national champion in the last 10 years had the most dominant defensive end?
10 years? Okay. I mean, we talking one individual defensive end, Trev? We can kind of set it unless Salty wants to answer it, but we talking one defensive end or are we talking defensive end rooms?
We could always answer both just to cover both of our bases.
Well, just off the top of my head, so we're talking 10 years would be 2025 to 2016. Is that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Okay. So I would say that the best defensive end tandem that I've seen is either it's either Clemson 2018, because remember they had Clellan Ferrell and Xavier Thomas as a rotation guy, and then they also had, I think it was Austin Bryant.
Yeah,
was their other end. That was a dominant group. And then Georgia Georgia, here's what makes it a little bit difficult, because Georgia in 2021, like, they had a couple guys that they would consider outside linebackers that I would consider kind of more of if we're comparing, would be more of defensive ends than anything else. But or do you count like Jalen Carter? Are we, you know what I mean? Like, those are those are the kind of the questions that I have. But Jalen Carter might be the most physically gifted guy that we've seen. In 2021, he was an absolute monster in 2021. And then you had like Nolan Smith and Robert Beal and a lot of those type of guys. So Georgia was pretty good too, but Georgia more threw waves at you. But like Jalen Carter was a very different player from Nolan Smith, whereas Bryce and Bubakar are not, because they're still more of a 3-4 team back then. So, that's probably where I lean. Like JT and Jack Sawyer were good. They weren't as good as the Clemson guys, in my opinion. They weren't as good as, in my opinion, of the edge guys that Georgia had in 2021. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Trev? It's my 2 cents.
Yeah, Clemson's absolutely in that discussion with their trio of guys. Georgia, and And again, Georgia's tough too, because like even if you go look on like PFF, like Michael Williams is considered a defensive end, and he was like a big end in like a 3-4
Right.
defense,
Like
which is so tough.
Jalen Carter and Michael Williams are different than like Jalen Walker, who was more of a linebacker, or even
Right.
like a Nolan Smith and a Robert Beal, who were true edge rushers, like outside
Yep.
linebackers.
Yep. And then like I said before, like Michigan was a team that could come at you in waves. Like Jalen Harrell led the team in pressures, but I mean they had like 4 guys over 26 pressures on the season, so they could come at you in waves. I'm with you a little bit on the Ohio State defensive end duo because like they put up really good numbers. Like they
Mhm.
had a combined like
And they had depth.
55 some odd like hits and sacks on the quarterback, like 80 some odd pressures, but I don't know if I'd put them on the same playing field as the guys at Clemson. If I had to go with one, I'd probably say Clemson at 18.
Yeah. The reason why I'd go Clemson 18 is because I think JT's 2024 season you could kind of put on par with some of those Clemson kids, but I don't think Jack Sawyer was nearly as good as the other Clemson guys. Because like just for some numbers, in 15 games in 2018, Clellan Ferrell had, these are just their DNs. You had 4 DNs, your top 4 defensive ends, because Justin Foster, who's a Carolina kid that Notre Dame recruited, was also part of that. Clellan Ferrell had 19.5 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks. Austin Bryant had 14.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. Xavier Thomas off the bench had 10.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. And then Justin Foster off the bench had 6 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. Like, that's really good. Like, that's really good. So I don't know that there was a better group than that. I'd probably go with the Clemson guys. I'd say if we're going to count Jalen Carter as a defensive end, he's probably the most dominant, just individual player. His numbers never look like it because that's just how the Georgia defense, his dominance doesn't result in a 3.5 tackle for loss, 2 sack game. It's like somebody else does that. It's more about him dominating is why you only rush for 15 yards in the game. It's just kind of how the Georgia defense is built, but I'd probably go Clemson.
Yeah.
I think that's the best D-line from the last 10 years, just period, because they were pretty good on the inside too.
Yeah, with
they were pretty good on the
Christian
inside.
Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence. Yeah.
Niles Pinckney, Albert Huggins coming on. I mean, they were pretty loaded. Yeah, they were pretty loaded. That would be my my pick on that. Here, just real quick from Tommy Guns, you're asking about like hit rates and all this kind of stuff, and this is one that I'll address. What is an elite and what is good hit to sack ratio? I can't really give you that number because it varies from defense to defense. Some defenses aren't going to produce a lot of that. Some players aren't going to produce a lot of that. Defenses that blitz more are going to likely result in more hits and pressures just because of the nature of the defense. Teams that rush 4 are not going to have quite as many of the hits and sack. Like, I would argue that part of the reason that Bubakar's hit plus sack ratio went down this year compared to the pace he was on in 2024 is partly played more games. And the other part is you'd see defensive ends kind of get some clean shots and some D tackles get some clean shots in 24 because of the blitz packages that Al Golden had. Whereas last year you didn't see as much of that. They had to win to get those pressures. And so it varies. Honestly, it varies. I kind of like the idea of if you add those two things together, I would like a 3-to-1, slightly maybe less than 3-to-1 is a really elite number. So if you have 60 pressures, you have 20 hits plus sacks in the quarterback, that's an elite number. Excuse me, I said 2.5, 3.5. Like a 3 to 3.5 ratio is kind of where I'd like to be, Trev. And if you can, for what Notre Dame does for a lot of different things, I think that would be closer to what my wheelhouse would be. If you look at like David Bailey last year, he was almost 2-to-1. That's a rare number. He had 38 hits plus sacks on 81 pressures. That's almost half. That also he also played against, the Big 12 all year and had some great numbers against some teams that weren't very good. You know what I mean? But like, that's still I don't care who you're playing. That's still a great number. So, I mean, against Oregon, for example, he had 4 pressures and all of them resulted in either a hit or a sack. Against BYU, he had 4 pressures and 3 of them resulted in a hit or a sack. Matter of fact, in both games, that was similar. BYU had 7 pressures the first time, 4 of them were hits or sacks. He had 12 pressures against Houston, 7 of them were a hit or a sack. He had 11 pressures against Kansas, 6 of them were a hit or a sack. 5 pressures against Arizona State, 3 of them were hit or a sack. That's a great number, but I don't know that I would say that's a normal number. It was a byproduct of the defense they played and the teams that they played against. Abdul Carter in 2024 was more along the lines of where I'm at, Trev. 66 pressures, 23 hits plus sacks on a quarterback. That's about a 3-to-1 ratio. That's about where I think you normally see kind of normal players. You know what I mean? Like, his number was just a little bit insane, which is why he's the number 2 overall draft pick.
Yeah, sure.
Now you could look at Arvell Reese. He was almost a 2-to-1, but his is a little bit different because he's a off-ball linebacker. It's a different animal. Because if you want to go down that road, say, okay, well then Bryce Young was a better pass rusher than Arvell Reese because he had more pressures. Not too far off of the hits. Well, it's different to compare an off-ball linebacker who also will line up and rush the quarterback than a guy that just plays on the line all the time. So, yeah, I think that 3-to-1 is about where I'd like to be on that. Good question.
From Juan Delgado, statistically, who will have the better 2026 season, Rodney Dunham or Keon Keeley?
I hope it's Keon. I do. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I kind of hope it's Keon because I just would like to see him kind of have that breakout season. Because I think if Rodney has a breakout freshman season and Keon has a breakout junior season, that Keon's junior season should look better than Rodney's freshman season, right? So if I want them both to break out, then I think Keon should probably have better numbers. But if Rodney outproduces them, so be it. I mean, that's big time. You want one of them to be a pretty good producer, but I think it'll be kind of close, honestly, Trevor. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of difference between the two, but I'd like for Keon to have just a little bit better season since he's older.
Yep, I'm with you.
All right, I've got one from Cayman.
You think Dunham could be as good or better than Aaron Lynch's freshman year?
Could he be better than Aaron Lynch statistically? That's going to be tough. I mean, Aaron had I'm looking up his numbers, 5.5 sacks as a freshman, 7 tackles for loss, 33 tackles. I don't know that he's going to play enough to put up those kind of numbers. I mean, Aaron was a starting defensive end for the final, 10 games of the season that year. I don't know that Rodney's going to get that kind of time. I could see his tackles for loss number being closer to what Aaron's was than the 5.5 sacks. Because I think Rodney could be I think that's where where we didn't talk a lot about it, but that's an area where I was not surprised. I was impressed at how far along he is as a run stopper. And just the motor backside, I could see him chasing down a couple plays. So it's possible. Could he be as good or better a style of play? Yeah, I think so. Aaron was a very gifted player. He's also a very inconsistent player. And so could Rodney will Rodney be as dominant as Aaron when Aaron was on? No, probably not. Could he be a better overall player because he's more consistent? Yeah, it's possible. It's certainly possible.
From Camden Hirschberger, with Fakatu and Fuller-Runchu both talking about potentially wanting a shot at big end, how do you think each would project to that position versus as defensive tackles?
Look, they can want to play that all they want, but if they want to play DN, they need to go to a 3-4 team. Or accept the fact that, hey, D tackles in the right defenses are very disruptive, dominant players as well, and go somewhere that you will be allowed to play over the tackle at times in certain looks. Because they're not going to go become first-round draft picks as defensive ends. They're going to be first-round draft picks as deep 3 techniques that can also play some 4-eye, some 5, in certain looks. That's where their game is suited. Marcus Fakatu is a heck of a high school defensive end. His game does not project the same way at the next level. Just doesn't. He's not as explosive as I think you really need an end to be. But there are absolutely some looks where he's Stephon Tuitt is what Marcus Fakatu could be and what David Fuller-Runchu could be. Stephon Tuitt is a really good defensive end at Notre Dame in a 3-4 defense that nobody really runs anymore. And then you say, well, go to Georgia. Well, Georgia's defensive ends, yeah, you're listed as an end, but they don't produce the disruption numbers. They haven't had a defensive end at that Jalen Carter spot that's produced the way Riley Mills produced for Notre Dame as a 3 technique. So I think it's about understanding who you are. And I think that's where I think the Notre Dame pitch has really worked really well for David Fuller-Runchu and Marcus Fakatu. It's because, hey, you are good here and you're good here. We're going to build around you in those 2 spots, as opposed to trying to tell you, oh, yeah, you're going to be a 4-3 defensive end. My understanding is they've been very honest, but they've also explained why this is why it's actually better for them than wanting to go somewhere that's going to tell them you're a defensive end. You're not going to ask David Fuller-Runchu to do what Romello White and David Bailey did last season, but their defensive ends technically didn't do that. Their defensive ends were kind of what Notre Dame's asking their D tackles to do. They're just telling you you're a defensive end. Their pass rushers were technically outside linebackers. So it's just about people will tell them things to get them there. And we see that all the time. I think Notre Dame has been very clear with how they plan to use them. So when they say end for those 2 guys, it's not like they're going to be, who's number 1 on the depth chart? Ebenezer Utade. Who's number 2? Marcus Fakatu. It won't be like that. It'll be more of in this package, Marcus Fakatu's an end. In this package, he's a 3 technique, and go about it that way. I think that's more in line with what the vision that Notre Dame has for them is. And I think it's the vision that they should embrace, whether it's coming from Notre Dame or Ohio State or Georgia, whoever else. If somebody's trying to tell you that you're a 4-down defensive end, they're lying to you. And they're going to move you inside as soon as you understand that you're not that guy. So just prepare yourself.
From Andre Tonsel, from this point forward, over under 6 commitments. By the end,
From this point forward, over under 6, end of May. So since this is a defensive end show, Andre, we're going to answer that question from a defensive line standpoint, and I'll say under. They'll be under 6 commitments on the defensive line. So by the end of May, will they be over under 6 commitments? I mean, we'll see about that. That'll be a topic for a different day, my friend. But for defensive line, I'll go under, although I could see them getting kind of close to that.
From Tommy Guns, Bubakar will have blank more sacks than the guys that's second on the team.
Say 4.5. 4.5 to 5 would be my range, Trev.
Yeah, my number was 5. We see that the same. Another one from Tommy Guns. Which end would be best suited to move inside on obvious passing downs in a speed pass rush package?
Bryce Young.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy one. These kind of rapid fire ones. I like that.
From Salty, what facets of a player's development result in him moving inside from defensive end? Well,
go ahead, Trev. Go ahead.
Some of it is just size. I mean, Riley Mills came to Notre Dame as a defensive end recruit, but I mean, he quickly outgrew the position. Now, there was some thought that maybe that could happen with Bryce Young because he came in as a freshman and was 6'7", 265 as an 18-year-old. So it was one of those where it's like, okay, if he just naturally gets to the point where he's like 285, 290, and it's not because he's in his dorm room eating pizza every single night after practice. It's just because he's naturally getting to that size. And that's what happened with Christopher Burgess. I mean, Christopher Burgess, if you've seen him, and I know everybody has, like he's put on very, very good weight. He just outgrew the position. So that's a part of a player's development that would result in moving inside because Notre Dame, the way that they run their defense, whether it's under Chris Ash or Al Golden, they're not going to have a defensive end in a 4-3 down setting where their defensive end is pushing 300 pounds. That's just not how I see it. So that's a facet.
There are guys that can do that. They're rare. They're very rare players in a true 4-down defense. So, size. Guys are more power players. Guys are more suited for playing a vertical game defensive end is only a vertical game if your tackle either sucks or blows as an assignment. There's always some sort of bend or counter, where D tackle is very much a vertical game. You're playing a vertical game. So your ability to bend, your lateral quickness aren't quite as important as they are playing defensive end. So you're more of a phone booth guy, then you're going to be better suited inside. Sometimes if there's a little bit of a lack of length to you, you might be better suited inside, where you're going to be more nose to nose as opposed to being in space as a defensive end, where your length has a much bigger impact on your ability to win and be successful. Guys that are more short area quickness as opposed to long speed might be better suited inside. So I think those are some things that just kind of pop off top of my head as traits that could lead to someone being better inside than they are outside. Where Riley Mills was a very I love this example you made. He was a very athletic, disruptive interior pass rusher. He would not be that as a defensive end. He'd be a power player as a defensive end. Now, 3-4 defensive end may be a little bit different, Trev, but a 4-down defensive end, because a 3-down defensive end is really no different to me than a 3 technique. He plays differently, and he plays different, a technique. 3 technique is a actual technique, right? That's, but when you say 3 technique, I'm using it from a positional player standpoint. A 3-tech D tackle is going to have a very similar skill set to a guy playing 5 or 4-eye technique, which is what you see in a 3-down. So that's kind of what I mean by that one. And then to Salty's question too, are there defensive plays featuring more than 2 DNs? That goes back to a previous question we just had, which is, I think Salty asked that one as well, which is going inside in a 3rd down pass rushing situation. That's a situation where you could see more than 2 defensive ends, but you're really not going to see a lot of that in Notre Dame's base defense. Now, there are some scenarios where you could see Bryce Young, Keon, and maybe Bubakar on the field in sort of an odd front. I could see that. I don't know that I do that a lot, where they're basically playing like 4 eyes or 5s, and then Bubakar's an edge rusher. You could see that in certain situations as well. Sure. But it'll primarily be in certain pass rushing situations where you might see that. And get the last one that we'll answer from Salty. Is there a DEU in today's college football? I think you still got to go to Ohio State, Trev. I mean, you still got the Bosas, you still got Chase Young, you know what I mean? Like, you've got Jonathan Cooper, you've got, Baron Browning for the Broncos. You've got JT and Jack Sawyer were day 2 draft picks last year. I think you still got to go Ohio State.
Yeah.
I think they're still DNU.
Agreed. From Jim Halloran, do any of the defensive ends have the ability to be an All-American? By the way, Notre Dame has never won a natty without an All-American defensive end.
Yes. Bubakar does, Bryce does, and the freshmen both do, in my opinion. Now,
yep.
They won't be All-Americans in 2026 unless it's freshman All-Americans, but Bubakar definitely does, and Bryce does to a degree as well. I don't think those things necessarily go together. All-American awards were put together back in the day differently than they are now. It's a different media. But I think the premise of what you're saying, Jim, is similar to what we said at the very beginning, which is it is harder to win a championship if you don't have a really impactful edge player. Yeah. I don't know that, like, if you were a national championship team at Notre Dame, you were going to have a lot more guys on the All-American list than maybe you otherwise would or should have. But and the game has changed a little bit too. But the point stands, you need dominant edge players, and I think Bubakar has a chance to be that guy.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, do you think the college football media and even some Notre Dame fans are criminally underrating the DNs, not just the players, but the guy coaching them?
I think from what little I've seen, I've never seen anybody like underrating or undervaluing Charlie Partridge. What little feedback I've seen about him is like, what a great hire. I do think the Notre Dame defensive ends are being, I wouldn't say criminally underrated. I think they're being underrated. And the reason I would say, no, they're not criminally underrated is because as talented as they are, I don't think their performance has warranted them being on the same stage as other teams' defensive end groups. And I don't think Notre Dame has the track record Like, I think people are assuming Ohio State's defensive line is going to be great again because they have a track record of producing that. I'm not as sold, but I also understand why people are looking at it because it's the track record. Notre Dame doesn't have that kind of track record. And, Bubakar was a really good player last year, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, but who's the number 2 to him? Maybe Bryce Young. He had 2 sacks last year. Actually had, I think, fewer sacks as a sophomore than he had as a freshman, I believe, or close to it. So I don't think that they're being necessarily underrated. I think the D-line as a whole is being underrated because Notre Dame should be getting more benefit of the doubt than they are at D-tackle because of the success they've had in recent years. But I think their D-line as a whole is underrated. I don't think, I wouldn't have Bubakar Traore on a preseason All-American team, not with the defensive ends that are proven and coming back in college football this year. I'll tell you this, we're going to do a preseason All-American list. I can promise you right now that Bubakar will not be on our first or probably second team preseason All-American squad because there's some great edge players coming back that are just way more proven than he is, in my opinion. That doesn't mean he's not an elite player or a first-round draft pick. He could be that, but he's got to prove that. He's had one full season of college football. So, no, I don't think the edge is being underrated. I think the D-line as a whole, however, is definitely being underrated. Also by Notre Dame fans, not just the media. But I think Notre Dame fans still underrate the entire defensive line.
Agreed. From Jay Melvin, I was watching a video on the Texas edge rushers, Lance Jackson and Colin Simmons. They seem to have taken well to the new defensive coordinator. How do you think Will Muschamp will utilize them more than Pete Kwiatkowski's did in his scheme?
Well, I think what you're going to see is from what I've read, and this is part of the post-spring top 25 research Trevor and I did, is that Will Muschamp is bringing a lot more pressure from the second level, which takes some of the burden off of the DNs to have to win every snap. And you're going to see some plays where they're going to get a lot more one-on-ones because of the pressure packages. They're going to get a few more run-throughs this year because of the pressure packages. And I think just overall the speed of the defense is going to be more effective. And you're going to see some opportunities where maybe last year with their big old run-stuffing D tackles, they weren't forcing quarterbacks out of the pocket into the ends. When they're blitzing Rasheem Biles and guys like that this year, to Anthony Smith, guys like that, you're going to see them, peeling out. And, I peeled out right into the waiting arms of Lance Jackson or Colin Simmons. So I just think the overall aggressiveness that I expect them to see is going to, more stunts where you're going to see Colin Simmons getting did he just come from the A gap? Yes, he did. Cause they ran a, twist where they shot the D tackle out and he loops inside and there's a blitzer, smashing into the center, that kind of thing, or across the face of the guard, something like that. I think you'll see more of that stuff this year than we saw under Coach Kwiatkowski, who was more of a Clark Lee type of keep things in front of you and bend but don't break and stuff like that, where Will Muschamp is more aggressive. Will it be better? Will it be worse? That we don't know, but I think it fits this personnel better than the other way around. And here will be the last one, Trev, that we'll get to today.
Brian, for defensive end, do you still like the 4-star kid from Fort Wayne? He's very raw but talented. Could he be the next Bubakar?
No, I don't think he's that because I just don't think he has the body for it. So he's talking about Afanya Madobi, who's a good, talented player, really twitchy, has a really nice first step off the line, has some explosiveness. First year playing football was last year, put up big-time numbers. Here's the problem. I don't think he's very big. His skill set could remind you a little bit of Bubakar, but I think he's probably closer to 6'2", 205, 210 than he is 6'5", 215, 225. I see pictures of him at workouts, and he looks more like a linebacker physically than he does a defensive lineman. And I think that's some of the hesitation that Notre Dame and some other people have for him is you got to pick the right defense. And I think Michigan's defense, that they used to run would have fit in pretty well where their ends are kind of stand-up edge linebackers. That might fit him a little bit better. I don't know that he's got the size to be the kind of guy at Notre Dame that a Bubakar is. So that's kind of my hold up on him, why I'm not quite as high. I mean, the explosive athletically, powerful hands and all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of like with Logan Thomas. That's kind of how Logan Thomas was. If you want to compare him to a Notre Dame player, that's who you compare him to, Logan Thomas. really athletic kid. I wonder if he's going to get big enough to play, on the defensive line at the next level. That's kind of my concern with him, Trev. There's a lot of things to like, but I do have some concerns about the body type, and can he hold up at the next level as a true edge player?
Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, guys are going live tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat at 5:05. They're going over some of CJ Carr's comments when he was on the Triple Option podcast with Urban Meyer and Mark Ingram. I went and listened to that. It's actually a really fun listen. So definitely tune into tonight's show, IB Nation Sports Beat, 5:05 p.m. Brian and I will be back tomorrow. And as of right now, barring any news breaking, we're going to be basically doing the same show we did today, but for the wide receivers, more state of the program. Definitely going to be a really fun topic. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.